Chapter 74. Let's go. Why aren't you leaving? Yin Yang asked curiously from behind. Are you going back on your word? No, no, no. Young Master Qin's face was already pale as he shivered in fear. How could I? Young Master Yin, please. After inviting Yin Yang in like he was serving his master, young Master Qin ran away like a rabbit that had been shot. He had to report this to his father quickly. If things went south, the entire Qin family would be gone. He could not afford to offend any of these people who had come. Yin Yang sat alone, sipping his tea. He was not in a hurry, a warm smile hanging on the corners of his lips. The young man looked like a jade, elegant and graceful, without a hint of impatience. The palace's jade was almost used up. They were going to buy it today. Yin Yang knew this, of course. The residences of the crown prince and the princes were running out of jade for rewards or other purposes. Besides, the crown prince and the princes were collectively grounded and could not leave the house, so they needed more items. What could he use to win them over or work for them if they could not leave the house? In this environment where jade was held in high esteem, there was naturally a need for this kind of jade. The crown prince's residence and the other princes' residences also began to rush to purchase the jades. It was also scheduled for today. Yin Yang knew all this, of course. If he did not know, he would not have come at this time. He sipped his tea quietly, his features elegant and his aura extraordinary. He was like a tranquil painting, stunning the maids beside him. What a quiet, handsome man. They had no idea that this quiet, handsome man was planning countless earth-shattering things. Today, in this jade farm, this quiet young Master Yin was going to stir up a storm. Not long after, young Master Qin ran over with sweat all over his forehead. Young Master Yin, my apologies, I've kept you waiting. It's all right. Yin Yang was gentle. Shall we go pick the jade now? Young Master Qin looked pained. The people from the palace and the princes are choosing now. Young Master Yin, do you mean to let me choose after they've finished picking? Yin Yang asked with a grin. In your eyes, do you think I like to eat leftovers so much? No. No, no, no. Young Master Qin's face was like a bitter gourd. What I mean is, you mean let's have some fun together? Yin Yang had already stood up and was walking out. Let me see what the royal demeanor is, the son of an imperial family. No, no. Young Master Qin's face was so conflicted that wrinkles were about to appear. What my father means is, young Master Yin, please don't be impatient. After a while, we'll go straight to my family's secret treasure vault. The items there are the treasures of my family for generations. They're definitely good stuff, much better than those so-called special grade items outside. This was the bottom line. Father Qin had repeatedly warned him not to say anything if he could keep his mouth shut. However, when Yin Yang stood up, he had forced young Master Qin's bottom line. Yin Yang stroked his chin and looked at young Master Qin suspiciously, asking slowly, Really? Really? It's absolutely true. Young Master Qin swore. Alright, I'll go take a look as well. I won't fight with them for it. I'll just go take a look together. That's fine, isn't it? Yin Yang asked. This is fine, but your identity? Young Master Qin heaved a sigh of relief. You can just tell them my identity directly. Am I not something to be seen? Yin Yang looked at young Master Qin strangely. I'll buy the jade and let them pick first. I'll just watch from the side and gain some knowledge. Can't I? Alright. The Qin family's jade farm, as the top jade farm in the Empire of Yutong, was naturally massive. It was Yin Yang's first time here. Along the way, he saw that the courtyards around the manor were all workshops. All sorts of noises were incessant. This is the first floor of the warehouse. The stones that can easily produce jade are all here. After the jade is harvested from the mountain, the windows are all opened. Not a single piece of good quality is leaked. This is the second floor of the warehouse. All the jade embryos are here. The innermost part is where the jade is displayed. As they walked, young Master Qin introduced the place. Once they entered, Yin Yang felt Amy in his subconscious become excited. Even its leaves, stems, and vines were wriggling madly. A soft and tender thought kept urging Yin Yang. There's good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff. Quick, let me eat it. I want to eat it. What, there's good stuff. Yin Yang could not take it anymore. With a dark expression he hollered, "Shut up!" Young Master Qin, who was introducing the place eloquently, shut his mouth abruptly and looked over in fear. "Young Master Yin Yang sweated. "Cough, I'm not talking about you." Young Master Qin was exasperated. "There's only the two of us here. If you're not talking about me, who are you talking about? What did I say wrong to make this fellow impatient again? Go on." Yin Yang looked at him strangely. "Why aren't you talking?" Young Master Qin was speechless. Once Yin Yang entered the hall, he saw that there were 6 groups of people in the hall, each of them clearly separated. Why are there 6 groups of people? Yin Yang was puzzled. There was a group from the palace, a group from the crown prince, and an underage prince. There should be no more than 3 groups. Why were there so many? The last group was sent by the mother of His Majesty's little prince, who was just born last year. Young Master Qin whispered into Yin Yang's ear. Yin Yang was speechless. He was not even a year old, and the little prince's mother was already thinking of building a team for her son? Wasn't this too early? A feminine voice spoke. "This humble one is here on the imperial edict. If there's anything better or of higher quality, why don't you take it out, Master Qin? This humble one will take it and leave. I won't disturb you further." Young Master Qin's father was sweating. "Take it out. Do I dare to take it out? I'll take out all the good ones for you. It's fine if you leave after you're done choosing. But where am I going to find the rest if they want the same quality as you? Which one of the remaining few is to be trifled with?" In spite of this, Master Qin was used to dealing with such situations. "If that's the case, Eunuch Wu, why don't we go to the 3rd floor together? The entire 3rd floor is filled with high-quality jade." Master Qin put on a straight face. "It's enough for all of you." "Very well." Eunuch Wu's voice was feminine. The 4 young eunuchs he brought with him were all handsome. He patted the head of one of the young eunuchs and touched his neck, saying, "If that's the case, please." Just as he was about to move, his eyes suddenly turned to the side, and he saw Yin Yang unexpectedly. His pair of eyes glowed with passion. He did not leave but walked over passionately. With a hint of reservation and passion he asked softly, "Who is this young master? You're so handsome. This humble one likes such looks." The way he looked at Yin Yang was like a pervert who had seen a naked beauty. He was drooling. Without a second thought, Yin Yang flung a huge slap across the man's face. Even if nothing had happened, Yin Yang would have wanted to find out more about this fellow's background. Now that this fellow had come up to him so disgustingly, how could Yin Yang hold back? Slap! A loud bang resounded. That's right, a slap to the face actually caused a loud explosion. Eunuch Wu's body flew up like a broken sack, spinning 7 to 8 times in the air before he landed on the ground. He flew out like a spinning top and crashed into the crowd of His Highness the Crown Prince's men with a loud bang, knocking 2 of them down. When he opened his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of blood along with 7 to 8 teeth. His gums were almost knocked out by Yin Yang. "Big! How dare you!" A young eunuch screamed. It was chaos in the hall. Yin Yang stepped forward, but the leader of the Crown Prince's men was obviously an expert. With a sidestep he blocked Yin Yang's way. "How dare you? Do you know the law of the land, committing murder in public?" Yin Yang snorted. With a flick of his hand, a sword fell to the ground with a hum. On the bright yellow hilt, 16 words were clearly divided into 2 lines. "Sword of mountains and rivers," as if the emperor himself had arrived. Supervising the officials, behead first and report later. The guard from the Crown Prince's residence narrowed his eyes. "It's the sword of mountains and rivers that His Majesty has bestowed upon Marquis Yun." Back then, His Majesty had bestowed the sword of mountains and rivers to Marquis Yun with the intention of beheading the incapable ruler and beheading the treacherous officials. However, Marquis Yun had refused to accept it, so it had been changed to these 16 words. "I can't hit him?" Yin Yang asked coldly. You can." The man paled and took 2 steps back. Yin Yang leaped up and started punching and kicking Eunuch Wu on the ground. In just a moment, he was beaten beyond recognition. His cries on the ground grew louder and louder, but they gradually weakened. "Young Master Yun." Young Master Qin came to stop him with a pale face. "Don't hit him anymore, he'll die." So what if I beat him to death? Yin Yang said angrily. In the end, he even kicked 3 to 4 times as he was pulled away by the crowd, scratching his arm. I'm so disgusted. Look at the goosebumps on my arm. The crowd looked at each other. Just because of one sentence, he had beaten up the person sent by the palace's inner court to this state? Such guts, there was no one else like him. When Yin Yang had struck, he had prepared countless tricks to defend himself. If this fellow was the Four Seasons Tower's spy, he would not be someone to be trifled with. He would definitely be an expert, there was no doubt about it. Feng Mafei had to be prepared to strike if necessary. However, he had not expected to be dealt with a single slap. Even Yin Yang had been a little dumbfounded. It seemed that this fellow was not. Since this was not the case, was the one on the crown prince's side? Yin Yang lifted his head, panting heavily. Suddenly, he lifted his head to look at the leader on the crown prince's side. What? Why are you looking at me? Are you unhappy? The man was speechless. I didn't do anything. Why are you suddenly coming for me? You're holding the sword that His Majesty has bestowed upon you to act first and report later. What else can I say? What's your name? Yin Yang looked like he was being unreasonable. Tell me your name. This humble one is Han Wufei. The man was annoyed and said with a cold expression, although this humble one works for the crown prince's residence, I'm not an official. Young Master Yin, what do you mean by this? T. Yin Yang said angrily. All lands under the heavens belong to the king. Those who lead the land are the king's servants. Why? Do you feel wronged because you're not an official? Where did this come from? Han Wufei felt like his stomach was about to explode from anger. He had never seen someone so unreasonable. The rest of you, tell me your names as well. Yin Yang looked at the other leaders. If I'm ambushed when I walk at night. After memorizing everyone's names, Yin Yang sheathed his sword slowly and said to Han Wufei with a tilt of his head, Han Wufei, behave yourself. Be more careful in the future. She slowly rolled her eyes and left. Now that he knew the names, he had a direction to investigate. He was satisfied, but Han Wufei, who was behind him, was fuming. This was truly an undeserved calamity. Eunuch Wu in the palace had some unique hobbies. Everyone knew this. And today, it was indeed this eunuch Wu who was blind and provoked someone he should not have provoked. Everyone knew this too. Then, Yin Yang would not be able to tolerate such humiliation and would explode in rage. The problem was, did all of this have anything to do with me, Han Wufei? What did it have to do with me? Why did it have to come back to me in the end? He even told me to behave myself before he left, and to be more careful in the future. Those who did not know better would have thought that he had offended some local thug. Chapter 75. Young Master Qin's gaze towards Yin Yang was filled with admiration. Too ferocious. He had never seen anything like this. He had truly learned something new today. Yin Yang also felt that he had been too ferocious today, and a little despicable. Yin Yang felt that if he had not met Dong Tianling, he would not have used such a despicable reason and method. It was too violent. It did not display the demeanor of a wise man. I must cut ties with that despicable person in the future. I've been infected for no reason. Yin Yang made up his mind. Why are you looking at me? Is there something on my face? Yin Yang looked at young Master Qin. No. Young Master Yin, you're too ferocious today. Simply. Young Master Qin's words flowed like a river as he flattered Yin Yang. Yin Yang was beaming from the flattery. Even if you want to flatter me, you still have to give me good jade. Yin Yang asked after enjoying himself. Where's the warehouse? Young Master Qin was speechless. He rolled his eyes and said, Here. I knew you couldn't forget your jade. I can forget it, I can leave now. Yin Yang was unperturbed. Sir. Big brother. Young Master Qin was shocked, his face pale. Please don't. After opening 17 to 18 locks, they finally entered a small warehouse. Inside there were boxes made of fine jade. They were neatly arranged. Once inside, Emmy was even more excited. This is great. Yin Yang's eyes shone. I want them all. With a plop, young Master Qin fell to the ground. Big brother, please spare me. I have all of our family's treasures for 300 years. I brought you here to express our sincerity. But my father has repeatedly reminded me that young Master Yin can only take 10 pieces at most. Don't make things difficult for me. If you take all of them, our family, 10 pieces won't do. Yin Yang refused without hesitation. Should I believe you just because you said 10? If you can say 10, then your bottom line must be at least 20. There were hundreds of boxes here. You let me in once, and you let me take 10? What kind of sincerity is that? At least 100. Yin Yang said decisively. He was asking for an exorbitant price. Oh my God! Young Master Qin yelled in grief and indignation. Take my life, at most 11. At least 90. No, absolutely not. 12 at most. At least 80. No, 13 at most. I can't be bothered to bargain with you. Yin Yang lost his patience. I don't care what your bottom line is. I'll just say a number. Fine, I'll take it. I'll give you money. No, I'll leave immediately and stop pestering you. What do you think? Young Master Qin said nervously. Then how much? 50. Yin Yang said coldly. Forget it if you can't. I don't want you anymore. Young Master Qin's face turned bitter. 50. His father's bottom line was not to exceed 25 yuan. But this lord was good, he directly flipped over. The precious jades here were no ordinary jades. Every single one of them was a priceless treasure that could be used to create life-extending jades. Is there such a dilemma? Yin Yang squinted at them. Actually, even if I say that I really want them all, you have to give them to me. Now I only want 50 yuan, and I'll pay for it. Deal. Young Master Qin gritted his teeth. How much? Gold? At least 5 million taels of gold. Young Master Qin endured the bleeding in his heart and gave a cost price. No problem. Yin Yang agreed readily. Isn't it just 5 million taels of gold? It's settled. How about the money? I'll owe it first. He wanted to cry but no tears came out. I'll choose first. Yin Yang said. It's easy to damage them if you move them around. Besides, the quality of the precious jades inside are about the same. Young Master Yin can just randomly move 50 boxes. Young Master Qin reminded him kindly. Don't worry. I'll just randomly pick 50 boxes. Yin Yang laughed. That depends on luck. In his subconscious, Emmy was already rubbing its palms together. To Emmy, which box was the most useful to it was obvious. Soon Yin Yang had drawn out 50 boxes in one go. The entire process took less than half a joss stick's time. That's all. Yin Yang said. If you pick and choose, you won't be able to explain to your family. Young Master Qin was moved to tears. Young Master Yin is generous. Finding the Four Seasons Tower's traitor was only one of the most important objectives of Yin Yang's visit this time. The other was to find nourishment for Emmy. Ever since he found out that Emmy had an unusual need for precious jades, Yin Yang had set his sights on the Qin family. In the entire Tiantang city, only the Qin family could have such a large reserve of precious jades. Therefore, he had rushed here when everyone else had arrived. It was to enter the secret chamber. However, he would not go overboard. Since he had said that he would take 50 boxes, he meant it. He would not take an extra box, nor would he do anything behind the scenes. Back then, the Qin family had been forced to trade with the treasure pavilion, committing the crime of deceiving the emperor. Although Yin Yang had a handle on them, he knew the Qin family's situation back then, and had no choice but to do so. After extorting them a few times, Yin Yang would naturally return the favor. How could he really force the Qin family to its death? Young Master Qin could vaguely feel this as well, so he allowed Yin Yang to extort him. He even quoted the lowest price to let Yin Yang take advantage of it. He knew that Yin Yang would never take advantage of others for free, even if he did not say it out loud. It was fine as long as everyone was aware of this. Some things could not be said openly. At the very least, if someone came looking for him, he could confidently say that he was being extorted. While the few families were still choosing their jades, Yin Yang had already left the jade farm in his carriage. Emmy could no longer hold itself back, wriggling and acting coquettishly, wanting to eat something good. Yin Yang did not agree to it. He wanted to go back and take a look, to see what these things were. He would have an idea of what they were when he prepared them in the future. At the same time, he sent a few names back. Those who were sent here by the princes must be among the top 5. even if they were not the top figures in their respective residences. Yun Yang wanted these 5 names to be a breakthrough point. As for Eunuch Wu, after thinking about it for a long time, Yun Yang only kept it in his heart and did not send it out to strictly investigate. The fellow who was almost killed by him with a single slap. The Four Seasons Tower would not take a liking to him, would they? Just as Yun Yang was about to approach the residence of Yin, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. A warning sign suddenly appeared. Feng Mafei, who was beside him, lifted his head thoughtfully as well. The dangerous aura disappeared in a flash. Yun Yang and Feng Mafei exchanged a glance. It should be the assassin from last time, Feng Mafei said telepathically without moving his lips. However, Yun Yang's cultivation base was not at the level yet, so he could only nod and say, "It feels familiar as well. After all, I haven't been assassinated many times. This fellow has come twice consecutively, it feels the same." Feng Mafei sighed and said, "Young master, I have a feeling that you'll have a lot more of this experience in the future." Yun Yang glared at him speechlessly. "Catch this fellow tonight," Yun Yang said. Feng Mafei's lips still did not move. This should be a real assassin. Once his attack missed, he retreated immediately and went far away. After some time, when the target should have let his guard down, he came back to peek, waiting for the opportunity to strike. Very experienced, although his ability isn't very high. This was Feng Mafei's comment. "It's just that this experience doesn't apply to me," Yun Yang said. Feng Mafei misunderstood Yun Yang's meaning and nodded in agreement. Because young master has offended more and more people, he's becoming more vigilant. Therefore, the more this assassin comes every night, the more people who want to kill young master. Young master's vigilance will naturally increase. Indeed, it doesn't apply. Yun Yang was exasperated. Could they still have a proper conversation? On the same night, Yun Yang took out 3 boxes and placed the rest where Emmy could not reach. Emmy was too young now. Yun Yang was afraid that this tiny seedling would overeat. Opening the box, an emerald glow shone out. Emmy danced happily. "Emmy, why do you have such a passion for jade?" Yun Yang asked, puzzled. Emmy answered as it devoured the food. Although its thoughts were vague, Yun Yang could still understand it. Jade was originally an ordinary stone. It could only be formed after millions and millions of years of precipitation and continuous absorption of spiritual qi. Therefore, jade was the purest form of heaven and earth energy. The higher the grade of jade, the purer it was. Mystical stones and mystical crystals can't compare to jade? Yun Yang was puzzled. Mystical stones and mystical crystals are only specific products. They can only be found in places where mystical qi can be cultivated. Jade, on the other hand, is a spirit of the earth's core that can be found in any continent or any space. Although mystical stones and mystical crystals look more practical than jade, jade is still purer. I see. Yun Yang finally understood. Amidst the question and answer, Yun Yang could clearly feel a sense of danger approaching from afar. The assassin had come again. However, he was fearless. "I've been waiting for you for a long time. Come, don't be afraid to make your move. Big Brother will create an opportunity for you." Yun Yang heaved a long sigh as he pushed the door open and walked out. It was as if he could not get rid of the gloom of the night, so he went out for a walk to relieve himself. Behind him, the 3 Eclipse Panthers were like 3 little pom-poms, following him closely. However, they were not playing together today. One at the back, one on the left and one on the right. Walking to the side of the flowering trees in the residence, Yun Yang could not help but exclaim in admiration. "The night is so alluring." He stood by the side, lowering his head to look at the tree's shadow. With his arms behind his back, he murmured, "I wonder how many years the moon in the 9th heaven has shone upon this mortal realm. In this world of mortals, there are ups and downs, wins and losses, and there are countless heroes and heroines. However, what kind of life can compare to the eternal moon in the sky?" Yun Yang raised his head and sighed. "Bright moon, oh bright moon, won't you grow old?" The moonlight was like water, shining down coolly. When Yun Yang lifted his head, his throat was clearly visible under the moonlight. He was extremely relaxed, completely immersed in melancholy, his hands behind his back. If it was an assassination, This would be the best time. Indeed, a cold glint flashed. A gust of cold air shot towards him from the roof of a house 100 feet away from the wall. It was soundless and extremely fast, but there was not even the slightest sound of breaking air. The cold glint had just appeared when it was already right in front of Yin Yang's throat. This assassin was very confident that this young Master Yin would never be able to escape his assassination this time. He had only come back to check on the situation and had not intended to make a move. However, he had not expected the timing to be so perfect. This fellow had actually gone crazy, coming out in the middle of the night to reminisce about the moon. He would feel sorry for himself if he did not make a move at such a time. Besides, after killing him, he only needed to borrow the force from the flowering tree beside him, and he would be able to leave immediately. The cold glint was nearing. Chapter 76. In the nick of time. A smile hung on Yin Yang's face. A saber. Unbeknownst to him, it had already appeared in front of Yin Yang's neck, blocking with the saber. Clang. The assassin's move was the same, the tip of his sword colliding violently against the saber's blade. However, he was shocked to realize that when his sword came into contact with the saber's blade, the tip of the sword, which was forged from the mystical steel of the seabed, was like snow coming into contact with a red-hot piece of metal. It was pulverized immediately. The tip of the sword was pulverized, followed by the blade's body. Such a strange phenomenon shocked him to the core. How could this be? At this moment, a white shadow flashed past. On the ground, the 3 kittens that looked harmless and could only be held as pets had leaped up at the same time. Swoosh, 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 3 clangs. The assassin groaned in pain. There were 3 scratches on his thigh, from the base of his thigh all the way to his calf, and blood flowed out like a fountain. There were 3 scratches on his back, and his bones were almost broken. His right hand, which was holding the sword, was actually clawed through by one of the kittens, and a large piece of flesh was torn off. What kind of cat is this? Is this still AF** king cat? I'm a 5th heaven pinnacle expert. My skin is as tough as steel. How can these kittens, however? He did not have the time to ponder this question. Right now, escaping was the most important thing. He had fallen into a trap. The assassin roared. Without caring about anything else, he spun his body and made an unbelievable turn in the air. Half of the sword flew out of his hand. Then he floated in the air and landed on the tree. His reaction speed was so fast that it dazzled everyone's eyes. He stamped his feet on the tree trunk, and his whole body flew up as if he was flying. With a wave of his left hand, a colorless thread flew out. As long as he exerted a little more strength, even the gods would not be able to stop him. However, at this moment he suddenly felt his vision darken. A burly figure suddenly stood in front of him. With a release of his grip, the thread that had been shot out appeared in this person's hand. Fang Mafei, go down! Fang Mafei's palm condensed the air within 30 feet of him into a huge metal plate and slammed it down. Wow! The assassin spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, and the sound of his bones cracking could be heard all over his body. It was as if he had lost all his bones, and he fell limply to the ground. Blood spurted wildly in the air, and his entire body sprayed out like a rainbow. Under Fang Mafei's palm, which far exceeded his abilities, he had completely lost the ability to resist. He laid face up on the ground, twitching continuously. His eyes, however, were filled with endless viciousness. His throat gurgled as he struggled to say, "What a great trap!" "Shut up." Yin Yang was taken aback. With a flick of his arm, a flash of light shot out like a bolt of lightning into the assassin's mouth, piercing through his head and pinning him to the ground. At the same time, Fang Mafei bellowed angrily as his long sword flew out at lightning speed towards the same spot. However, Yin Yang's divine edge had already pierced in. Fang Mafei's sword was right on top of the divine edge. Plop, 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 plop. Fang Mafei felt a sharp pain in his heart. In the blink of an eye, only the hilt of his sword was left. The distance from the tip of the sword to the body of the sword disappeared like snow and water. It did not disappear. It had turned into a puddle of silvery powder. That was close, Yin Yang exclaimed in relief. With a wave of his hand, the divine edge flew back into Yin Yang's palm. With a flip of his hand, it disappeared. If I hadn't noticed his shut up, I'm afraid this corpse explosion would have been. Yin Yang was relieved. Fang Mafei nodded in a daze, still staring at his sword hilt. What was going on? The trap. Within the trap was a half-open mouth, but when the assassin spoke, his mouth was shut. Yin Yang instinctively felt that something was amiss, and acted immediately. A small black bead rolled out from the assassin's mouth. It was the root of his tooth that had been sliced off by the divine edge. Fang Mafei flipped it over and sucked in a breath of cold air. Corpse explosion pill. This was an extremely venomous item, hidden in the mouth and protected by a crystal coat. If one were to die, one only needed to bite through it, and the corpse explosion pill's poison would spread throughout the entire body. Then, the person would die instantly as the corpse would be soaked in poison and explode. Each piece of flesh, no matter where it landed, would produce poison that would not dissipate for years. If any drop of blood landed on a person, the person would rot and die instantly. It was the most venomous thing in this world. It's indeed the Merciless Tower's handiwork. Fang Mafei looked at Yin Yang with a complicated expression. Only the Merciless Tower's gold-ranked assassins and above are equipped with the corpse explosion pill. I really don't know. He swallowed the rest of his words. I really don't know how you managed to provoke the Merciless Tower after causing so much trouble in Tiantang City. Yin Yang was indeed confused. Yin Yang was a little dumbfounded. When did I provoke the Merciless Tower? Did someone hire a killer to kill me? Get rid of the corpse quickly and rest. Yin Yang looked at Fang Mafei strangely. What are you waiting for? My sword. Fang Mafei looked at the hilt of his own sword. Only then did he start to panic. My jade sword. The corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched. Fealty jade sword, this is your jade sword? Fang Mafei wanted to cry but no tears came out. Fealty jade sword. Fang Mafei had a great reputation in the martial arts world. However, ever since he had pledged his allegiance to Yin Yang, his jade sword had been destroyed inexplicably, the only time he had drawn his sword. Yin Yang was in disbelief as well. You, old Fang, you're really something. You've made such a name for yourself in the martial arts world with something that's not even as hard as tofu. I can't help but admire you. Not even as hard as tofu. Fang Mafei felt an itch at the base of his teeth as he gritted them and said, This is mystical jade from the bottom of the sea, a land of extreme frost. Thousands of feet below, mystical jade's ice heart chalcedony, sky heart iron jade stellar steel essence, took 10 years to forge this sword. In other words, it was much harder than tofu. Oh, Yin Yang hummed in acknowledgement and walked back. Fang Mafei was still confused. Young master, what is that sword of yours made of? How could it? With a swoosh, Yin Yang flashed the divine edge. Look closely. This is a saber. Old Fang, I have to say something about you. You've roamed the martial arts world for so many years. Yet you can't even tell the difference between a saber and a sword? Fang Mafei's eyes widened. Yin Yang had already turned to leave. It's just a sword, it's worth the heartache. I'll give you 300 gold taels tomorrow. Go buy yourself a divine weapon first. Fang Mafei was about to faint. Isn't it just a sword? That's the weapon that made me famous. Also, is 300 gold taels a lot? Go buy a divine weapon. I can't even buy the rust on a divine weapon's hilt. Fang Mafei made a tragic decision. He would buy an ordinary sword the next morning to use first thing in the morning. However, there was still endless doubt in his heart. How could there be such a saber in this world? Yin Yang returned to his room. Drawing 3 names in the air with his fingers, he tilted his head and pondered for a while. These 3 names were the people he thought would hire assassins to kill him. Of course they were, until now. Yin Yang enjoyed his meal, even though it was already midnight. However, he was hungry. What made Yin Yang feel very satisfied was that he had only eaten 11 caddies of mystical beast meat, 3 big steamed buns and 2 meat pies. But he already felt extremely full. Of course, he also drank a bowl of soup. My appetite has decreased. Yin Yang was pleased. If this continued, it would not take more than a month for him to recover to a normal person's standard. Yin Yang really did not want to eat too much. It was too different. After the joy, Yin Yang began to think, who should I find trouble with tomorrow? The faint sound of a horn from afar caused Yin Yang's expression to sink into a grave expression. The war was about to begin. The army would depart in no more than 3 days. Yin Yang had spent the entire day and night forcefully making himself happy, forcefully making himself domineering, forcefully blackmailing and threatening, forcefully adjusting himself to search for clues about the Four Seasons Tower, forcefully telling himself that he was only doing this for revenge. He did not care about anything else. However, in the end, he realized that all his efforts had been crushed by the sound of a horn from afar. War. That was the battlefield of the 9 Supremes. My brothers aren't here anymore, so I don't care? Yin Yang stood up and looked at the night sky outside the window, breathing deeply. In his mind, he heard the voices of his 8 brothers speaking in a low voice. Yutong's blood, Yutong's soul, Yutong's men, Yutong's army. Before him, the eyes of 8 brothers seemed to be staring at him, saying, national vendetta or personal grudge, OL 9th. Which side do you care about first? Don't force me. Yin Yang closed his eyes and murmured, I'm not a saint. I don't have the power to turn the tide either. I don't want to fight with my life on the line, just to protect a bunch of people who want to kill me with everything they have. I don't want to fight with my life on the line, and let these people bully my family after I die. I don't want to die in battle and let my brothers be wronged. I don't want to. I'm really not a saint. Yin Yang kept repeating this to himself. However, in the end, he slammed his head on the table and moaned in agony. Tomorrow at noon, I shall enter the residence of Supremes. Finally, it was time to face everything. Finally, he still had to face the bloody cruelty. He still had to unravel the scar in his heart. I don't want to. I want to go after I take my revenge. Yin Yang laid on the table quietly, as if he had fallen asleep, not moving at all. However, he had not slept at all. He had been lying there the entire time. He was only waiting for dawn to come. He could feel that there were 8 pairs of eyes looking at him tenderly. There were warm smiles in their gazes, as well as a soaring desire to fight. OL 9th, we are Yutong's 9 Supremes. First there was Yutong, then the 9 Supremes. Not for the world but for the people. First avenge the nation, then avenge the family. Yin Yang's body is the soul of the 9 Supremes. OL 9th, go. For the sake of our homeland, for the sake of not being bullied. Dawn. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei had woken up to cultivate facing the morning sun. But why was it so quiet today? If it had been in the past, their young master would have already come out to exercise, absorbed the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and plucked the essence of dawn. Why was there no movement at all today? Both of them exchanged glances. Fang Mafei shook his head. Lao Mei sighed and walked to Yin Yang's door, knocking lightly. There was no response. Tilting his head to listen, his expression changed immediately. With a push of his shoulder, he pushed the door open and rushed in. There was no one in Yin Yang's room. There was a note on the table. I'm fine, I'll be back late. Young master, where did you go? Chapter 77. Yin Yang's purple robe fluttered in the wind. When he stepped out of the door, he felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had decided to go to the residence of 9 Supremes. Ever since the 9th day of the 3rd month last year, he had been repelled by this place. Each time he was near the residence of 9 Supremes, he would feel ashamed to face his elder brothers. What are you doing here when your revenge has not been avenged? Yin Yang walked forward with a heavy heart. Just as he turned a corner, he met a group of people head-on. Both parties were stunned at the same time. It was Ji Ling. The person walking at the front was Ji Ling. She wore a light purple veil over her face and a long green dress. The color of her clothes was plain, but the ethereal aura she exuded when they first met was overwhelming. There were 5 or 6 young ladies by her side, and every single one of them had extraordinary looks, bright eyes, graceful figures, and peerless elegance. Then there were some guards, maids and guards. There were hundreds of them. Seeing Yin Yang walking over, deep in thought, the eyes of these girls shone brightly. Amidst the morning mist, a youth dressed in purple walked over slowly. He was handsome and elegant, but there was a hint of melancholy in his light robe. The scene was like a painting. Even the misty morning mist seemed to have become ethereal and beautiful. It's you. Ji Ling's gaze was complicated. Where are you going? Yin Yang replied. What about you? Where are you going so early in the morning? When the other girls heard the conversation between the two, their eyes suddenly lit up. They looked at them with a smile that wasn't a smile, but they didn't say anything. Ji Ling's gaze dimmed for a moment before she smiled and said, "Of course I'm leaving the city since I'm heading in this direction so early in the morning." Yin Yang was surprised. "Isn't the shortcut on the opposite street?" Ji Ling was stunned. She retorted angrily, "Why do you care?" Some of the girls covered their mouths and giggled. Their bright eyes exchanged glances and winked at each other. Although they did not speak, it actually gave off a feeling that they were chattering nonstop. No wonder this girl refused to take the shortcut and insisted on leaving the city. So that was it. Ji Ling's heart was filled with embarrassment. She really did not want to see Yin Yang again. It was just that she was about to leave the city, but she had somehow insisted on passing by Yin Yang's door. However, he did not expect to meet this guy so early in the game. "You're leaving?" Yin Yang asked in realization. Ji Ling's anger dissipated as she nodded lightly. "I just received news that a young Master Ling Feng has appeared in Tiannan. He looks like my brother. We should all go and take a look." His voice was very low and filled with an indescribable emotion. Yin Yang's heart skipped a beat as he said calmly, "Tiannan? So far away?" Ji Ling replied, "Yes, it's so far away." Yin Yang said calmly, "The journey to Tiannan is 75,000 miles. Take care, Mississippi." Ji Ling lowered her eyes and replied, "I will, and so will you." Yin Yang nodded. For a moment, both of them were speechless. A faint sense of melancholy was gradually growing and spreading. Ji Ling's eyelids drooped as she felt her heart grow increasingly bitter. "You also know that 75,000 li. You also know that it's a long journey. But do you know that the chances of me coming back are very, very slim once I leave? Do you know that the chances of us meeting again will be very slim once I leave?" A woman who was obviously a little older, with a hint of worry between her brows, took a serious look at Ji Ling, and then at Yin Yang. Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and said, "Yes, Sister Ling after leaving Tiantang City this time, I really don't know if she'll ever come back here again in this lifetime." As she spoke, she watched Yin Yang's expression. Yin Yang said softly, "Yes, from now on. The mountains are high and the rivers are far away. We can only meet in the martial world." The girl in white frowned, thinking to herself, "Why is this child so insensitive?" She was a little angry, but looking at Ji Ling's pitiful expression in the morning breeze, her heart softened and she said, "We're about to reach the ends of the earth. Does this young master not have anything to say?" Yin Yang was taken aback. "Say what?" Gritting her teeth, the girl said, "We've known each other for a while. We should leave some traces in our lives. Sister Ling, I saw you fiddling with that sachet last night. What are you trying to do with it?" Ji Ling was extremely embarrassed and almost screamed, "Sister Lan." Sister Lan was resolute. "Since you've seen it in person, why don't you give it to me? Are you really going to throw it away when we leave the city?" Ji Ling snorted and forced a straight face. Her voice was cold as she said, "Young Master Yin, it's fate that we've known each other for a while. Since we're about to part, this young sister has something to give you. I hope that you won't mind." As she spoke, her ears turned red. Biting her lips, she took out a small white sachet from her robes and handed it over after a moment of hesitation. Yin Yang sighed inwardly and said, "Thank you, young lady, for your kindness." He could only accept it, but he knew in his heart, this was nothing more than a young girl's attachment. Just as he had said, Tiannan was a long journey, 75,000 miles away with countless mountains and rivers in the way. A round trip would be 150,000 miles. Even an expert would have to travel for a year. Moreover, they both had things to do. Even if they had any intentions, they would not be able to achieve anything. It was just a legacy, but it was just a legacy. Seeing that Yin Yang did not respond after taking it, Sister Lan frowned and said, "Young Master Yin, my sister has already given you the sachet. Don't you have anything to say?" Yin Yang searched his body and realized that he did not have anything on him. He chuckled bitterly and said, "Luckily, I won a saber from the bet last time. This saber is small and exquisite. It's useless for a man like me. Why don't I give it to Lady Ji?" I hope that this saber can keep you safe in the martial world's turmoil. As he spoke, he took out the treasured saber Phoenix's cry. It was one of the 7 swords and 3 sabers forged by the master blacksmith Ohunzi. The treasured saber Phoenix's cry. When Yun Yang had won it the last time, he realized that this saber was a lady's saber, or rather a maiden's saber. He had no use for it at all. It was no wonder that Shiman Wandai had offered this saber as a wager. It turned out that the fellow had no use for it either. Yun Yang had nothing else on him except for this saber. His original intention was to conceal his divine edge when he had something to do. Now that he had nothing else to give away, he took this saber out. Sister Lan's eyes brightened as she said, "Young master is so thoughtful. Sister Ling, why don't you accept it?" Ji Ling blushed behind her veil and reached out to receive it. Yun Yang sighed in his heart as he felt the innocent feelings of a young girl. After today's departure, I may not be able to live to see you again. If that's the case, let me give you a present before we part for the sake of your feelings. He held the treasured saber Phoenix's cry in his hand, his right hand gripping the hilt. With a thought, Emmy reluctantly sent out a continuous stream of life force into Phoenix's cry. It was done in a matter of moments. Yun Yang flipped the scabbard and passed the hilt to Ji Ling. He said softly, "The martial world is dangerous, take care." Ji Ling suppressed the tumultuous emotions in her heart and bit her red lips. She nodded slightly and said, "You too." Her voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. As she took the treasured saber, she suddenly felt a strange feeling, as if the saber had completely merged with her body at that very moment. She did not need to wield it, but it already felt extremely comfortable. Have a safe journey to Tiannan. Yun Yang stood up straight, his smile gentle. We shall part ways here. The journey is long, we shall meet again. We shall meet again, Ji Ling said softly. She then bit her lip and clamped her legs together. Hiya! The healthy horse neighed and moved slowly. Ji Ling's slender body stiffened on the horse, her mind a complete blank. The horse moved forward step by step, the sound of its hooves echoing against the ground. With each step, she felt that she was a step further away from Yun Yang. However, she did not turn back. She subconsciously allowed the horse to move forward, the bitterness in her heart slowly turning into sorrow and pain. Her heart was throbbing with pain. She could only hear her sisters talking behind her. Sister Lan said, "Young Master Yin, take care. We shall part ways here, we shall meet again." Another sister's voice was tinged with laughter. "Young Master Yin, I am Xia Yuhan. Remember my name, haha. Young Master Yin, I am Yi Xiang'er. Can you remember me the next time we meet? Young Master Yin, I am." Everyone's laughter rang out incessantly as the sound of the horse's hooves grew faster and faster. She was already hundreds of feet away. There were no more farewells behind her. Ji Ling tried her best to resist the urge to turn back and take a look. She rode the horse stiffly, her mind blank as she walked forward. She did not know when, but tears had already blurred her vision. One of her hands gripped the treasured saber of Phoenix's cry tightly. Sister Lan urged the horse to catch up to her and sighed softly. "Sister Ling, if you're upset, why don't you cry it out? You'll feel better." Ji Ling lowered her head, a string of tears falling soundlessly into the dust. She bit her lip and said, "Sister Lan, why did you insist that I give the sachet to him? Wouldn't it be better to forget it from now on?" Sister Lan smiled gently and said, "Would you forget?" Ji Ling did not reply. There aren't many opportunities for a woman to fall in love in her life. Sister Lan's voice was filled with melancholy as she said, "Just like today, this young Master Yin is obviously the one we didn't see the other day. He's from Tiantang City. We're in 2 different worlds. Perhaps after we part ways today, the both of you will never see each other again in this lifetime. However, to have a remembrance in your hands, and to be able to feel the feelings of the past, it's a good thing. It's better than having regrets in the future. You've obviously fallen in love before, but there's no trace of it left in your life. That's a real pity. I asked you to leave the sachet and take this saber with you, because don't have the same regrets as me in the years to come." Sister Lan said sadly. Empty-handed, Ji Ling hugged the treasured saber of Phoenix's cry tightly. She could feel the warmth of that person on the saber. She could not help but feel reassured as she comforted her. Sister Lan, we will definitely find my brother. Sister Lan shook her head and sighed softly. Yes, we will definitely find him. However, there was not an ounce of confidence in her voice. 2 streaks of tears fell soundlessly. Ji Ling felt the same. Seeing that the city gate was right in front of her, she could not help but turn back to look. The long street was silent, the morning breeze blowing a few fallen leaves from the ground. It was empty. Where was Yin Yang? She could not help but feel a pang in her heart as tears filled her eyes. Go! With a shout, the group sped up and rushed out of Tiantang City's south gate. 2 splashes sounded. Amidst the dust, a string of water stains appeared. Chapter 78. Yin Yang held the sachet in his hand. When he saw Ji Ling leave without turning back, he could not help but feel a little sentimental. With a sigh, he kept the sachet in his robes and was about to walk forward. Suddenly, he felt Amy's restlessness. What's wrong? Yin Yang thought sensitively. Is there something wrong with this sachet? Holding the sachet in his hand, he squeezed it lightly. Indeed, there was a round bead inside that began to spin as he squeezed it. Yin Yang was puzzled. When he opened it, he saw a round bead the size of a little finger amidst the clusters of spices. It was emitting a hazy halo. Vaguely, a faint fragrance wafted from it. Holding it in his hand, he saw clouds swirling on the surface of the bead. With a gentle turn, there was actually a small green dragon gliding through the clouds, puffing out clouds and spitting out mist. The pearl of the flood dragon. Yin Yang was shocked. This was a priceless treasure. The phoenix's cry treasured saber that he had given away, compared to the pearl of the flood dragon, was like heaven and earth. The pearl of the flood dragon, as the name suggested, was a precious pearl taken from the body of a flood dragon. The flood dragon had almost surpassed the category of mystical beasts, being a 9th-level pinnacle mystical beast. Perhaps, it was because the known classification of mystical beasts only went up to the 9th level. Hence the flood dragon was a 9th-level pinnacle mystical beast. If there were 12 levels in this world, then the flood dragon would still be a 12th-level pinnacle existence. A flood dragon's entire body was a treasure. Its flesh, blood, skin, tendons, and bones were all treasures that a martial artist could only dream of. However, the most precious was the pearl of the flood dragon within the flood dragon's spine. Each of the flood dragon's 24 vertebrae contained a pearl of the flood dragon. It was the source of the flood dragon's essence and vitality. Furthermore, each pearl of the flood dragon contained a part of the dragon's soul. A pearl of the flood dragon, when worn on one's body, could absorb the power of the dragon's soul, the essence of the flood dragon. It was of great use even to a grandmaster pinnacle martial artist. Moreover, it contained the power of heaven. If a grandmaster could wear the pearl of the flood dragon to comprehend it, he could even comprehend the ancient dragon god's legacy and break through the void. How could such a thing be described as a priceless treasure? This girl. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh. He felt a heavy weight on his heart. You're really willing to leave this treasure here with me? When he turned back, there was no one in the distance. By then, Ji Ling and the rest had already left the city. The sachet in his hand still had a delicate fragrance. Yin Yang sighed softly and kept the sachet in his robes. Yin Yang had mixed feelings regarding this sentiment as well. Emmy, you can't eat this, Yin Yang murmured. Emmy wiggled its body, its tendrils swaying as it demanded coquettishly, I'll watch if you don't eat. Yin Yang smiled and let go of his grip. The pearl of the flood dragon was already in his deific consciousness. It landed at Emmy's feet and rolled around. Emmy's thin tendrils curled up the pearl of the flood dragon and rolled it back and forth between its roots, enjoying itself. Yin Yang realized that Emmy was indeed not eating it. It was even trying to inject its vitality into the pearl of the flood dragon. The misty radiance on the flood dragon pearl began to flicker. A seedling and a bead, yet they were having so much fun. Yin Yang could not help but chuckle, not bothering himself with it. The 9 heavens domain. It was also the residence of 9 supremes. Outside, at dawn, there were already a few veterans cleaning in the morning fog, meticulous and meticulous. This was a sacred place in their hearts. They would never allow any dirt to exist outside the residence of 9 Supremes. Even a fallen leaf could not fall on the ground that the heroes had once stepped on. Yin Yang hid behind a tree, his eyes focused on the 9 heavens domain that was hidden in the thick fog, his expression changing. Even the strong wind that could topple a mountain could do nothing to the thick fog of the 9 heavens domain. Yin Yang sighed soundlessly, leaning against the tree as his body gradually faded away. He turned into a cloud of fog, drifting in the morning light. He dissipated in the air. In an instant, he melted into the thick fog of the 9 heavens domain. Amidst the thick fog, everything was silent. Yin Yang entered the residence of 9 Supremes soundlessly, looking at the various powerful forces hidden in the thick fog that kept flashing around him. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, metal, wood, water, fire, blood, fire. Yin Yang felt an endless sense of familiarity. Only he and his brothers could enter and not be harmed. Others, even if they were the world's top grandmasters, could not even dream of taking a step into the 9 heavens domain. In front of him was a hall. It was not made of gold or jade, but it was extremely sturdy. It was also the only spacious place in the residence of 9 Supremes, where his brothers would come to discuss matters. Now, standing alone in the empty hall, Yin Yang felt a lump in his throat as hot tears fell from his eyes. In front of others, no matter how turbulent Yin Yang's heart was, he would never shed a tear. However, now that he was in a familiar place and he was alone, he no longer wanted to hide the emotions in his heart. I, Yin Yang, have no one to rely on wandering around alone. My master was killed before I succeeded in my studies, wandering the martial world. Finally, I was discovered by Big Brother and became a member of the 9 Supremes. From being alone, I suddenly have 8 brothers. This satisfaction and happiness is indescribable. Even if I have to fight in the battlefield every day, I have no other desire as long as my brothers are by my side. However, God has only given me this happiness for 5 years. I'm still alone in this world after all. Around him were rooms made of the same material, that was neither gold nor jade. They could be used, but they could not be destroyed. Yin Yang looked at the rooms. The doors were tightly shut. It was as if the 8 brothers had locked themselves out of the room together. Yin Yang closed his eyes, suppressing the bitterness in his heart, as he walked into the inner room. It was a small, empty room, but this was where the biggest secret of the residence of 9 Supremes was unlocked. Yin Yang walked into the room, and suddenly spun like a whirlwind. His feet stepped in a strange position, each step with a different force and direction. He spun 9 times. The entire room was filled with afterimages. Finally, his foot stomped heavily in the center. Creak, creak, creak. An extremely faint sound could be heard. In this small room, a crack suddenly appeared on the ground. It was all gleaming cold steel, and was definitely not made of any known material. More than 100 feet thick, they were all made of this strange steel. Slowly, the ground cracked open to reveal a 3-foot wide opening. Below it, layers of stairs made of strange steel rose slowly, all the way to the opening. In a flash, Yin Yang stood on the first step. As he stood on it, the stairs began to sink slowly. The fine steel barrier above began to close slowly as well. When Yin Yang had completely sunk into the ground above was already flat, without a single crack. It was a strange place. There were still 9 identical, tightly shut doors. The only difference was that the symbol on each door was different. This was where the 9 Supremes truly cultivated. It was also where the 9 Supremes' real secret lay. In this world, there were only 9 people who knew this secret. Now there was only Yin Yang. In the center of the 9 doors was a strange high platform. It was crystal clear, a piece of flawless jade. If anyone else had seen it, they would have exclaimed in surprise. Communication jade. The communication jade that people knew of was only the size of a palm, but it was already priceless. However, there was a whole piece here that was as tall as a man. On the platform, there was a token. The 9 heavens dictum. This was the real 9 heavens dictum. Yin Yang's gaze was cold as he walked up slowly. His right hand stretched out slowly, gripping the token. Brothers, I've brought the 9 heavens dictum out. Then, he came to the door that was carved with a white cloud. Cultivating, an ethereal white cloud appeared in the air, white and flawless. The white cloud on the door floated up soundlessly and merged with the white cloud that Yin Yang had condensed in the air. The door opened abruptly. Yin Yang entered in a flash. The door closed. Yin Yang stayed for a full 10 days after entering this time. In these 10 days, the wind howled in this small room, and the wind rose and clouds surged. When he came out again, he walked to Eighth Brother Supreme Wind's door. After a long time, his eyes glinted as he raised his palm. A gust of wind suddenly appeared. The wind blew directly into the door. Supreme Wind's door opened abruptly. It was empty inside. Yin Yang's tears streamed down his cheeks. Eighth brother, with you here, I will never go in. But now, I have to go in. I want to know who you are. I want to know where your family is. Eighth brother, don't worry. As long as I, Yin Yang, am here, no one can bully my family. Yin Yang entered in a flash. In Supreme Wind's room, there was the complete cultivation method of Mystique Wind. Yin Yang had etched all the secret manuals deeply into his mind. Then he took out an envelope at the bottom. Inside was Supreme Wind's will. I don't know which brother has read my will, but I feel funny now. I'm still alive and well. I, Supreme Wind, don't think that anyone in the Tianxian continent can kill me. Haha. But the boss insisted that I write my will and leave it here. I can't help it, he's the boss of us brothers after all. If I, Supreme Wind, am still alive, I will fulfill my wishes one by one. Of course, if I'm really dead, there are still many things I can't let go of. My surname is Ji. My name is Jilingfeng. This is my name. Isn't it cool? Haha. When Yin Yang read up to this point, he was suddenly shaken. His face suddenly turned pale. He stood up abruptly, wanting to rush out, but he sat down dejectedly in the end. Jiling had left for 10 days. How could he still catch up to her? I have a brother who has been missing for many years. My brother's name is Jilingfeng. That night, Jiling's sorrowful voice seemed to ring in Yin Yang's ears again. I heard that he appeared in Tiantang City. I'm so stupid. Why am I so stupid? Yin Yang raised his hand and gave himself a tight slap. Yin Yang, what right do you have to call yourself the Nine Supremes think tank? What right do you have to call yourself Supreme Cloud? Your brother's portrait is right in front of you. Don't you recognize him? How dare you say you're familiar? Jiling is eighth brother's sister. My biological sister. Yin Yang was filled with regret. Chapter 79. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh. Jiling is going 75,000 miles away to find her brother. Yin Yang closed his eyes in pain. How could she possibly find it? Back then, after a battle, Supreme Earth had asked his wounded brothers to write their wills. As long as the earthen jar doesn't leave the well, the general will inevitably die in battle. If one day, we are no longer around, we have to make arrangements for our funeral. This is the first. Also, when we're gone, it's best that the Nine Supremes cultivation method is not lost. Perhaps one day, when there is an accident, I will be able to read the wills and fulfill the wishes of my brothers. Everyone silently accepted this decision at the time. Thus, they began to make their own preparations. When they returned, they each handed over the first level of their secret arts to their next brother. Earth, metal, wood, water, fire, thunder, blood, wind, and cloud. After settling down with each other, everyone said that their mood was too heavy, and that it made their hearts uncomfortable. Hence, they all dispersed and went out to find ways to relax. He remembered that time. It was the Blood Lord who pulled him and said, "Old Nine, follow me to kick a dark yard." A faint smile appeared on Yin Yang's face as he reminisced. After a long while, he lowered his head to read the content at the back of Supreme Wind's will. It's something that I can't let go of. I'll just say it for the time being. But I don't think I'll need your help, haha. Supreme Wind's tone was still relaxed. Obviously, Supreme Wind did not take it seriously when he wrote the will. However, the more Yin Yang looked at it, the more uncomfortable he felt. I have a younger sister, my only family. My sister's name is Jilingxi. Isn't that a nice name? I'm warning you guys, no one is allowed to have any ideas about my sister. We are two orphans, but we were found in a small village in the Empire of Yutong. We should be from Yutong, right? Haha, I see myself as a Yutong citizen anyway. When I was 8 years old, both my parents died. My younger sister and I were adopted by the G clan. At that time, the clan head had no descendants, so he took us in as his children. 10 years later, the clan head had a son, so my position was a bit awkward. Haha, my younger sister is a girl after all, but I the eldest young master henceforth. Hee, do you understand? I understand. Eighth brother, you make it sound easy and humorous, but I understand the bitterness in your heart. I don't care about being the young patriarch or eldest young master, but my existence is definitely a big worry for the clan. So I had no choice but to run out. But I didn't expect that the moment I escaped, I would be lured here by our boss. Let's not talk about unhappy things. If I really die, brothers, help me take care of two people. The first is my younger sister, Ji Lingxi. Lingxi is my baby, the person I miss the most. If anything happens to me, you must take good care of my sister. You are not allowed to tell my sister that I'm dead. You are not allowed to make my sister sad. You are not allowed to entrust her to the wrong person. You are not allowed to make my sister unhappy. You're not allowed to make my sister unhappy. You're not allowed to. If you can't do it, then just die. A series of inaccuracies. The image of a brother who loved his sister as much as his own life appeared. It was as if Yin Yang could see Supreme Wind right in front of him, looking at him unhappily with a frown. I'm sorry, eighth brother, Yin Yang sighed deeply. I seem to have made our sister unhappy too much. My sister is the first. She's my darling. Whatever good stuff you have, give it to her first. You must love and coax her. My sister likes to wrinkle her nose when she's angry. Whoever makes her wrinkle her nose, I'll crawl out from my coffin and beat you to death. The second is my fiancé. You didn't expect that, did you? Actually, the marriage was set before there was anyone. I was still young then, but when I grew up, I liked her very much. Her name is Yurulan. Isn't it nice? Sigh, other than my sister, she's the girl I like the most, but she's also the one I've let down the most. She likes me too. I was thinking that as long as I'm alive, I'll marry her. When the 9 Supremes matters come to an end, I'll invite all of you to my wedding. Hopefully, there won't be a chance for me to ask for your help. Because of the clan, there was a period of time when I kept a distance from her. Do you think that I'm not like a man? I've thought it through now. I want to marry her. Haha. Of course, if I'm really dead, tell her that I've had a change of heart, that I've married someone and lived in seclusion. That'll do, there's no need to explain. She's narrow-minded. I'm worried that she'll take things too hard. I'll have to keep an eye on her for at least a year. This girl is stubborn. This is more difficult. I don't think I'll die either. How can the 9 Supremes die? I don't think I'll need all of you. You Rulan. Yin Yang's gaze froze again. He recalled that morning when he had met Ji Ling leaving the city, the girl in white who had accompanied her, and helped her exchange gifts with him. There seemed to be a hint of worry shrouding her brows. She looked extremely melancholic, as if she was weighed down with worries, and was in low spirits. Ji Ling had called her sister Lan. Besides, she had gone to look for her brother with Ji Ling. That must be Yurulan, right? Yin Yang's heart wrenched in pain. Eighth brother, I'm sorry. I've seen both of them, but other than that, when I'm not on a mission, my clone is. Despite Supreme Wind's disapproval, he had still listed out his biggest secrets. The clone was when the 9 Supremes needed to relax when they were not on a mission. And this identity was another identity that only they themselves knew. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly, and could not help but roll his eyes. The last time his other identity had clashed with someone outside, and almost suffered a loss, it was actually because of this 8th brother. He had not expected that the identity of 8th brother's clone was actually the person he had always wanted to take revenge on. Other than that, there's a hole under my chair. I'll kill whoever dares to say that I fart. Inside is OL7's Art of Crimson Soul's first stage. Once you've mastered it, you'll be able to open OL7's door. Other than OL7's cultivation method, there's also my Mystique Wind Conjuration, my Supreme Wind Medallion, and a Mystique Wind Orb. There's also a Pearl of the Flood Dragon for my sister, and a piece of jade that Lawner gave me back then. Whoever sees this will, I'll give it to him. Or, I can return it to Lawner too. If I die, I need to make her give up completely. Otherwise, what's the point of waiting for a dead person like me? How King inauspicious. However, I've left a message for Rulan then. When I become a hero, I'll bring 100,000 troops to marry you. However, if this will of mine is seen by all of you, it'll truly be a hero's dream, a lifetime of beauty. However, think of a way to be her matchmaker. Don't waste your life because of me. If that's the case, I won't be able to rest in peace even if I die. There's something else that I'll tell you as well. I had a mysterious encounter that time, and fell into a mountain stream. In the end, I fell into a cave that was some expert's residence. There were a few books about the mystical beasts of the mountains and seas. They're all on my table. Whoever sees this I'll give them to you as well. A few pearls of the flood dragon were obtained from there as well. I've used the rest, don't even think about it. Actually, one last complaint. Boss is a troublemaker. He's living well to write his will. CK. I'm thinking now if we can join hands and beat him up. What kind of stupid will is this? It's giving your father a headache. I almost cried. CK. Boss is a dumb bird. Then, there were a bunch of complaints. Finally, let me say something serious. How should I put it? We the 9 Supremes are considered heroes for protecting our country. If there's a day where we die in the battlefield, your father will feel quite honored to die fighting for our country. I'm a citizen of Yutong. I'll die happily for my country. If I die in the battlefield, don't seek revenge. There's no vengeance. The warriors of other countries fight for their country as well. Who doesn't want their country to conquer the world? Also, boss is always preoccupied, always unhappy. OL second, OL third, and OL fourth are carefree. The 3 of them are murderous. I'm not worried about them. However, 5th brother's matter has to be settled quickly. If I die, urge him, tell him that I said it. Your father hasn't been able to drink his wedding wine until I die. Don't let the other brothers miss it too. Ask him to do it quickly. CK. Such a good woman is waiting for him, and he still has so many problems. That bastard is so unreasonable. OL 6th is fine, just that he has a lot of secrets. I feel that his family background isn't ordinary, a noble family, is it? Damn it, acting all high and mighty in front of your father every day. OL 7th's murderous aura is too strong. Tell him that I said it. I hope 7th brother can be more open-minded before he dies. OL 9th has too many thoughts. He's so young, but he's always thinking of conspiracies. Talk to him more when you're free. Don't let him be like a little old man every day. Even if you're free to beat him up, it's still better than that. If I die, my words will definitely work. Do you believe me? Ha ha ha. Let's not talk about it anymore, I feel terrible. Haha. Supreme Wind was laughing in the will. However, Yin Yang's tears were falling as he read it. 8th brother. Although you didn't say it out loud, in your heart, you're most worried about us brothers. Do you know that the other brothers are all gone as well? Yin Yang finished reading it. He was very reluctant to do so, repeating every word as if 8th brother was right in front of him, grinning cheekily. After a long while, Yin Yang stood in Supreme Wind's room, watching Supreme Winds will slowly turn into ashes in a ball of fire. Every stroke and stroke in the will was etched in his mind. 8th brother, I'm going out. Cultivate the first stage of your mystique wind conjuration these 10 days. I can open your door, but to open 7th brother's door, I'll need to cultivate the first stage of Art of Crimson Soul. The wind and cloud are interconnected. The cultivation is fast, but it won't be so easy for me to cultivate Art of Crimson Soul. I'll come and see you then. Don't worry about our sister. I'll find her and take good care of her. I promise. As for Sister Lan, Yin Yang's face was filled with melancholy. You have Sister Lan on your side, looking for you in all sorts of ways. While 5th brother has Sister Yu, waiting for him in a daze. 8th brother, 5th brother, what do you want me to do? How can I bear to hurt her cruelly according to your method? It was as if 8th brother Supreme Wind, who usually played around with life and scolded, was still sitting in front of him. Yin Yang kept pouring out his grievances. All of you have handed all these things to me now. But what about me, 8th brother? Yin Yang wailed in agony. How I wish it was all of you reading my will now. Yin Yang murmured, His handsome face almost twisted into a menacing expression. He mumbled for a long time. He sat for a long time as well. After a long while he finally stood up. "I'll go out first. I'll come back to see you after I've found my sister and sister-in-law. Remember to tell the brothers not to worry," Yin Yang said in a low voice. "OL Ninth is still here. OL Ninth can carry it even if the sky falls." Yin Yang bowed deeply at the 8 doors. Then, he turned and left in large strides. A cloud of fog floated in the sky above the residence of 9 Supremes. Below it there were obviously more skeletons. Was it because there had been people coming to crack the residence of 9 Supremes in these 10 days? Good death. Yin Yang's gaze was cold. I'll strengthen the 9 Heavens domain. No matter how many people come, as long as they want to crack the 9 Heavens domain, they shall all die here. After some work, a cloud of fog floated out from the residence of 9 Supremes. The air was immediately filled with a deep sense of sorrow. The 2 veterans who were cleaning up were rather sentimental. Sigh, the 9 sirs. If the 9 sirs were still here in this battle, there's no reason for us to lose. Sigh. It's a pity that the 9 sirs aren't here after all. Yin Yang was stunned. Chapter 80. The plan Yin Yang had set for himself was to issue the 9 Heavens dictum to search for Ji Ling and fulfill 8th brother's wish. This was the first step. Then, he would continue to hunt down the 4 Seasons Tower's men, ferret out the people in the palace and around the crown prince, as well as the so-called authoritative military general, and continue to follow the clues. This was the second reason. Yin Yang was also thinking about how he could intervene in this battle. However, he had never expected that he would lose this battle, after only staying in the 9 Heavens domain for 10 days. Logically speaking, even if the scale of such a battle isn't huge, it's not something that can end in 10 days, or half a month. Yin Yang was perplexed. So soon? Could something have gone wrong? As he moved forward, everyone he saw along the way wore grim expressions. Obviously, the dark cloud of defeat had shrouded the entire Tiantang city. Horns blared from all directions. The rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves came from all directions, as well as the intense drumming that filled Tiantang Square. Who's going out this time? Yin Yang changed his direction and headed towards the square. A cloud floated past leisurely. On the stage, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan and another white-haired old general stood tall like 2 gods of war, clad in armor and gleaming with a chilling light. A golden dragon sword and a tiger talisman were each held by the 2 old generals amidst the deafening drumming. They were given to a burly general, who was almost 2 heads taller than an ordinary man. Marshal Tai, the responsibility of the Eastern defense is great. The Empire's safety is in your hands. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan looked solemn. You must reclaim the Fortress of Resilience and chase Dongshuan's enemy out of the Empire's borders. On the other side, the burly man in martial attire spoke in a sonorous voice. This lowly general will not fail his mission. Dongshuan's army will not be able to return. The Fortress of Resilience will forever belong to Yutong. The marshal's flag unfurled. A huge Tai character fluttered in the wind amidst the crimson sky. The drumming continued. Taizheng lifted his head abruptly to look at old Marshal Qiu Jianhan. His gaze was intense when no one else could see it. The old marshal looked at his prized disciple with a solemn gaze. This lowly general understands. Taizheng stood up slowly and received the dragon sword and tiger talisman, raising it high. He did not speak, his cold gaze sweeping across the 3 armies, as the sword in his right hand vibrated. Down below, the 3 armies suddenly burst into an uproar. Victory! 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 Fight! 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 The voices of 100,000 soldiers almost tore a hole in the sky. It was just an action without any words. But the soldiers of the 3 armies immediately went crazy. This was Taizheng's unique charm. It was also Taizheng's honor. The Empire's invincible marshal of Taizheng, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan's favorite disciple, the 7th Tianxian. Tai, unyielding and unyielding, is the soul of a soldier. Taizheng's subordinates were all proud soldiers and valiant generals. They had always been the empire of Yutong's military prowess. Taizheng had fought in the north and south with countless merits. He had never lost a battle and never failed to conquer it. It was almost to the point where he could not be rewarded for his meritorious service. It was old Marshal Qiu Jianhan, and old General Leng Douyin who had suppressed him, forcing him to keep a low profile. That was why he had not gone to war in recent years. Now it was finally time for this ever-victorious army to move out. Like a lion that had been locked in a cage, it had now stepped out of its cage and was shaking its feathers. Its gaze was already looking far away. Its fangs were slowly bared. Although it had yet to move, the color of blood had already filled the entire grassland. Below, every officer under Taizheng's command was dressed properly, standing straight like a pine tree. Their eyes were looking at their marshal, who was on the podium with fervent passion. From the generals to the soldiers, everyone's eyes were burning with passion the moment their marshal received the tiger talisman. They were bloodthirsty and frenzied. To them, the battlefield was to gain merit. Enemy? In this world, there is no enemy that can stop us. This was the faith and confidence that belonged to the proud soldiers and valiant generals. Taizheng's muscular frame faced the entire army, his tiger-like gaze sweeping across them without a word. The army suddenly went silent. At this moment, the entire field was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone knew that Taizheng was about to speak. Taizheng stood there without saying a word. Under the gaze of His Majesty and the two old marshals from afar, he suddenly howled into the sky. His voice was fierce, piercing through the air. The murderous intent in his voice almost froze the entire space. Let me tell all of you, the enemy we're about to face this time is the continent's god of war, the empire of Dongshuan's first marshal, the first in the ranking of the famous generals, Han Sanha. Are you all afraid? Not at all. 100,000 soldiers roared in unison. Let me tell all of you, we're about to face the empire of Dongshuan's invincible steel cavalry, Dongshuan's shadow cavalry. Are you all afraid? Not at all. Let me tell all of you, some of you will die in this war. Taizheng's voice was hoarse. Are you all afraid? Not at all. The soldiers below were equally hoarse. Tell me, who are we? Yutong's steel cavalry. Yutong's steel cavalry is invincible. Yutong's steel cavalry is invincible. Tell me, have you ever been defeated in a war? Taizheng's voice was thunderous. We are invincible. Invincible. We are invincible. Invincible. Let us tell Han Sanha who we are. Taizheng. Unyielding. The soul of the army is eternal. Good. Taizheng shouted. For Yutong. The 100,000 soldiers cheered together. For Yutong. For our families. For our families. For us. For us. For glory. For glory. Let us tell the invaders. Taizheng roared. Yutong is invincible. Invincible. Yutong is invincible. Invincible. Like a thunderclap, everyone felt the thrill that reached their souls. Every strand of their hair seemed to be standing on end from the agitation. Yutong's warriors are still here. Taizheng shouted with his arms raised. Unyielding, loyal souls forged the fortress. The three armies roared in unison. Taizheng leaped up and mounted his warhorse, waving his sword as he roared. Depart! Roar! Drumbeats thundered as the 100,000 soldiers began to move in unison. The front line moved with a rumble while those at the back, brimming with murderous intent, did not budge. Only when it was their turn did they finally gallop out. They couldn't wait any longer. They were so swift. Clouds of smoke billowed into the sky, as the hooves of the 100,000 soldiers were in perfect unison. The army was like a dragon, whipping away. It had only been an hour, but the 100,000 soldiers had already left the city, galloping en masse. Watching Taizheng reorganize the army is indeed a pleasure. Old General Leng Douyin watched the retreating army and smiled while stroking his beard. With just a few words, a bunch of proud soldiers and valiant generals were stirred up by his murderous intent. Old Qiu, this disciple of yours is not bad. Qiu Jianhan sighed softly, his gaze worried. Taizheng is a great general, but the enemy he's facing this time is not weak at all. Han Sanha. He's the nemesis of both of us. Old Leng, you can't be unaware of Han Sanha's prowess. Leng Douyin sighed as well and murmured, Han Sanha. Back then the saber and sword duo, were almost beaten into a pair of saber and sword bears by him. Qiu Jianhan sucked in a deep breath. If Taizheng can't hold the fort, Yutong will be in real danger this time. Once Taizheng's troops are defeated, only the two of us will be able to hold the fort. I guess we can't hold the fort, and can only move the capital away. Leng Doyin was silent. After a long while he said, "What did you tell this disciple of yours before he departed?" Qiu Jianhan did not speak for a long time. Finally, he closed his eyes and enunciated each word clearly. "If we're locked up, we'll live. If we're locked up, we'll die." Leng Doyin shuddered. "Did Taizheng have any other requests?" Leng Doyin asked. "Taizheng only asked me if the 9 Supremes were still around." A bitter smile hung on Qiu Jianhan's face. Leng Doyin's expression changed. Taizheng doesn't have the confidence to win this battle. He doesn't have the confidence to win. This is bad. Leng Doyin's hand shook, pulling a few strands of his white beard. Facing Han Sanha, who would dare say they would win? Qiu Jianhan sighed. Taizheng's departure. Leng Doyin looked at the rising dust in the distance. What else did he say? Qiu Jianhan's expression was forlorn. He asked me one more question. Why did we let the 9 Supremes disappear just like that? This fellow's resentment towards this matter isn't small. When the matter of the 9 Supremes came out, Taizheng brought his guards and almost surrounded the palace. He wanted an explanation. Leng Doyin chuckled. This child has a good temper. Qiu Jianhan chuckled bitterly. 2 of the 5 most elite cavalries in the entire Tianxian continent, the Shadow Cavalry and the Steel Cavalry, are finally going to fight head-on. Leng Doyin murmured. Outside the city, the army was on its way. Taizheng's expression was steely, his muscular body unmoving on the horse's back like a silent mountain. Throughout his military life, he had gone into battle many times, but this was the first time he had no confidence or confidence at all. If we're locked up, we'll still be alive. If we're locked up, we'll die. Yutong's bureaucrats. Taizheng thought quietly in his heart. If we win this time in return, even if I give up all the merit I have, I'll still have to purge them. If we lose this time, we'll have to massacre them once. A warring kingdom in troubled times, the military's morale must not falter. Beside him, from the general to the soldiers, the 100,000 soldiers wore the same expression. Their faces were steely and expressionless, their gazes burning with murderous intent. What do I Taizheng fear? Taizheng laughed into the sky and said loudly, when we return from this battle, your father will treat all my brothers to wine. To my wedding wine. A loud boom resounded. The army erupted at once. We shall congratulate the marshal with unparalleled merit. A deputy general cheered with his arms raised, his face flushed with excitement. We shall congratulate the marshal with unparalleled merit. The 100,000 soldiers roared in unison. Ha 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 ha. Taizheng's guffaw was filled with heroism. The army sped up, their voices sonorous, and united as they sped away into the distance. Were the vanguard faster? Do you still want to attend the marshal's wedding wine? Scouts, send out another wave. 10 waves of scouts. I want all the information within the 600 miles ahead. Quick, quick, quick. Soaring Eagle guards, follow the scouts. Dark Knight group, work with Soaring Eagle. Provide support in the dark. Blade Edge guards, prepare to meet the enemy. Sharpshooter bows ready. Shield battalion, work with sharpshooter bows. Everyone, pay close attention to the supply camp. Be ready to provide support at any time. Orders were issued one after another, using the unique communication method of Taizheng's subordinates, passing through the entire army at all times. Yin Yang watched as Taizheng's army departed. The cloud was still hovering even when they reached the city gate. He knew the brutality and danger of this battle. Taizheng was formidable, but his enemy was Han Sanha, the continent's god of war. Taizheng might not be able to hold out for too long. Yin Yang felt a sense of urgency. Can I still make it in time? Hold on. Taizheng. Chapter 81. Yin Yang returned to the residence of Yin. Faced with Feng Mafei and Lao Mei's confusion, he did not bother to explain, and went straight into the secret chamber. Emmy, I need to break through to the 3rd peak in the shortest time possible. Mystique Wind Conjuration also needs to break through to the 4th stage. Aya. With Dongxuan's army pressing on the border and Yutong's survival on the line, Yunyang finally decided to temporarily put aside his grudges and personal matters to focus on his cultivation. What Yunyang wanted to cultivate now was Supreme Wind's Mystique Wind Conjuration. There was also 7th Brother Supreme Blood's Art of Crimson Fiend. He only needed to cultivate the 1st stage and go to the residence of 9 Supremes to open 7th Brother Supreme Blood's room to retrieve 6th Brother's Thunder Crash Conjuration. After cultivating the 1st stage, he would find 5th Brother's Fiery Charm and continue cultivating. The time was very short. However, Yunyang had to do it. The only thing that could help the army now was the combination of wind and flame. It would be best if Thunder Crash Conjuration could be cultivated to the 3rd or 4th stage. However, Yunyang guessed that he might not be able to do it even if he risked his life. There was not enough time to cultivate the 3rd or 4th stage of Fiery Charm. However, Yunyang had to do it even if he had to risk his life. Brothers, you have protected this country for so long. You must not lose the honor of the 9 Supremes in my hands. 5th Brother Fire. How nice would it be if you were my 7th or 8th brother? I can only get 7th Brother's key when I open 8th Brother's. I can only get 6th Brother's key when I open 6th Brother's. I can only get your key when I open 6th Brother's. Yunyang mumbled in his heart. If Supreme Flame was still here, Yunyang would definitely not be able to escape this beating. This child actually wants to demote me? Disappearing for 10 days out of the blue, and coming back to cultivate in seclusion? Fang Mafei was puzzled. Is this something to be surprised about? Lao Mei rolled his eyes. Disappearing for 3 months out of the blue, and coming back to cultivate in seclusion for 3 months. Have you seen this before? Fang Mafei was shocked. There's actually such a thing. Lao Mei rolled his eyes and said earnestly, Old Fang, there are so many strange things, abnormal things, unimaginable things, and crazy things happening to our young master. You've just arrived. You need to get used to it. Go clean up the courtyard. Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei's departing silhouette and scratched his head in confusion. In such a large marquise mansion, there's so much money to spend. Hiring a maid and a servant. Will it kill you? What a lunatic. Making me, a 7th celestial layer expert, sweep the yard. Tianting City fell into silence as everyone waited for news from the front lines. Victory or defeat. News spread like snowflakes. On the 4th of June, the war at the Fortress of Resilience began. Dongxuan's soldiers crossed the border. On the 14th of June, the Fortress of Resilience fell. On the 15th of the 6th month, Taizheng's army struck. On the 21st day of the 6th month, Taizheng's vanguard entered the battlefield, sweeping everything in their path and forcing the enemy to retreat back to the Fortress of Resilience. The nation was in jubilation when the news spread. On the 23rd of the 6th month, Taizheng's army fought with all their might for 2 days to recapture the Fortress of Resilience and faced off against 2 enemy troops outside the fort. On the 3rd of the 7th month, Dongxian launched an all-out attack. Outside the Fortress of Resilience, the Shadow Cavalry was mobilized while Taizheng sent 20,000 steel cavalry to fight. The battle lasted until the 5th of the 6th month, when all 20,000 steel cavalry were killed. Of the 30,000 Dongxian Shadow Knights, less than 2,000 had survived. The whole country was in an uproar. On the 4th day of the 7th month, 200,000 Empire of Dongxian reinforcements arrived at the battlefield. The front line was in dire straits. On the 5th of the 7th month, Yutong sent out the last batch of reinforcements. For the time being, this was the last batch of troops that could support the battlefield. They would not be able to do so for at least 2 months. The nation was silent. A sense of sorrow and despair began to spread throughout Yutong's borders. Little Nan Nan carried Big Whitey and opened the door of her house. Her curious and pure gaze looked at the uncles in front of her. All of them were so clean and nimble today. What were they doing? Wana walked out of her room in shock. Brother Li, Brother Lu, Brother Fang, Brother Meng. What's going on? Come, tell your sister-in-law. A middle-aged man with 3 scars on his face and a blind eye wore an honest smile. We are going to enlist in the military. Enlist in the military? Wanner asked in surprise. Didn't all of you retire due to your injuries? Looking at these people, who were either blind or had lost an arm, they were actually wearing their old military uniforms again. A faint valiant aura exuded from these people once again. Retire due to injuries. We've only injured our eyes and lost our arms. We still have our legs. At the very least we still have a hand. Brotherly smiled honestly. Now that the country is in danger, and it's a matter of life and death, we have to go to the battlefield if we can still fight. Otherwise, when Dongxuan's army comes, it will be our humiliation. Although we've taken off our military uniforms, we're still soldiers. Since we're Yutong's soldiers, of course, we have to fight for this country. So many families of our fallen brothers are in this country. Our lives were exchanged for by our fallen brothers. Now that the front line is in danger, we have to go. We have to return what we owe to our brothers. Don't call us cowards when we meet underground one day. Haha. We're here to bid farewell to sister-in-law. To inform you that the possibility of us coming back is extremely slim. If sister-in-law needs any help, look for old cripple, and the rest in the future. They're crippled and can't run, so they won't be going this time. Another young man who had lost his left arm chuckled and said, There's one more thing that I'd like to ask sister-in-law for. You know, there aren't many in our family who can read. There's no one to teach our children. If sister-in-law has the time, teach them more. Don't go down the wrong path. When they grow up, let them go to the battlefield and avenge us. Yes, Wanner, please put in more effort in the future. The few of them bowed at the same time. A veteran blinked with his remaining eye and smiled honestly. I haven't done much in the few years I've been back, but I've given birth to a few children. Our generation is gone. But when the children grow up, my family can have at least 3 children. 2 each. And I've managed to get my share. Nonsense. Why don't you hope that the children can make contributions and become generals? A veteran beside him slapped his head. I'm afraid they don't have this fate. The veteran chuckled. Wanner looked at these people and felt her eyes burning. I'll send you off. Eat at home tonight. I'll go buy some wine. No. The few of them smiled honestly. Tonight, we'll eat at our own homes. We'll leave early tomorrow morning. Tonight, we still have to talk to the wives and children. As he spoke, he handed over a bundle. You orphans and widows, your lives are harder than ours. This is a few taels of silver that we've pooled together. When we're not here anymore, use this to buy some floral cloth for darling, make some clothes, eat some good food, and find a good husband, hee. Amidst the simple and honest laughter, the dozen of them turned and left. Wanner looked at the backs of these veterans, her vision blurred by tears. You'll definitely come back safely. She had once resented the army for taking her husband away and never coming back. But now, looking at these veterans, she suddenly understood something. Perhaps, in the hearts of these hot-blooded men, there was no such thing as hegemony in the world. But to protect their homes, to protect their country, to protect everything they cared about, they were duty-bound. Just as they said, the families of so many brothers who died in the war are still alive in this country. Our lives were originally exchanged with the lives of our brothers who died in the war. This time, we'll return it to them. We'll return it to them, lest we meet underground one day, and they call us cowards. Hee. Wanner's tears flowed uncontrollably as she thought of this. Darling opened her bright eyes. Mother, what are the uncles going to do? Will they ignore Darling in the future? No, they won't. Wanner's tears flowed like a fountain. The uncles will protect you forever. Chen San stood in front of the residence of Yun in his military uniform. Lao Mei opened the door. Sir Butler, is the young master in? Lao Mei shook his head. No. Chen San's expression was one of regret as he smiled sheepishly and said, I wanted to bid farewell to the young master in person. I'm afraid I won't be able to repay young master's kindness in this lifetime. Lao Mei frowned. What's wrong? I'm going to the battlefield. Chen San smiled sheepishly. Many brothers are going too. The front line is said to be very dangerous. After all, we've killed enemies and seen blood. There's nothing to be afraid of, we'll go again. Now that the 9 sirs are gone, Yutong is in danger. We still have our hands and legs, we can still fight. We're going. After that, He knelt down and kowtowed 3 times at the residence of Yun's door. Chun San will repay young master's kindness in my next life. He turned to leave. Lao Mei felt something choking in his throat. Chun San. Sir Butler, what are your orders? Lao Mei took out 2 gold ingots and stuffed them into Chun San's arms. Take this back to your wife. Don't reject it. It means you're looking down on young master. Do your best. Chun San, come back alive. The entire Tiantang city, the entire empire of Yutong, was filled with such scenes. Dawn of the 2nd day. The remaining soldiers walked out from the alleys and from the dilapidated houses, quietly and neatly lining up on the streets. Before the sun had risen, almost all of them had assembled. With a soft command, as if he was afraid of waking up his wife and child who were still sleeping, he quietly began to walk towards the city gate. Some of them were missing their left hand. Some of them were missing their right hand. Their gait looked odd, as if they were not neat at all. However, just looking at their legs, the frequency of their gait was exactly the same. They held the weapons that they had used to fight on the battlefield, their faces solemn as they walked out in a relaxed manner. There were already many people gathered outside the city gate. Countless veterans with broken legs were left out of this operation, but they did not sleep for the entire night. They had come out of the city early to send their brothers off. This was a crippled army. No one was not injured. No one was not crippled. Many of the crippled generals wore shiny armor and rode on their horses, watching their brothers gather from all directions like rivers flowing into the sea. Slowly, the number of people increased. Let's send off our brothers. Jars of wine were placed on the ground. Countless veterans with broken legs straightened their upper bodies at the same time. All the remaining soldiers bowed to the ground at the same time. Brothers, please take care of the family. There was no departure ceremony, no gongs and drums to send them off. Brothers, depart. Someone called out hoarsely. A huge flag unfurled with a flapping sound. Battle in the mountains in my dreams. Even with my broken body, I can repay the nation's kindness. The army departed in silence. There were tens of thousands of them. Their steps were firm. Not a single one of them turned back. Don't turn back. If we can come back alive from this war, we can look at it however we want. If we can't, we'll feel even worse when we turn back. The morning breeze whistled through Tiantang City. They went further and further away. It was only then that the silhouettes of countless women and children dared to show themselves. They had been here, covering their mouths as they watched their children, their men, go to war once again. Tears streamed down their cheeks soundlessly. This chaotic era, these days of war, when would it end? Suddenly, the sound of galloping hooves could be heard. 2 swift horses charged out of the city gate like lightning. On the horses were 2 old generals, Yutong's 2 gods of war, Qiu Jianhan and Leng Douyin. Looking at the departing army, the 2 old generals stood for a long time with hot tears in their eyes. They are all heroes. It's just that we have mistreated our heroes. Chapter 82. Tiantang City seemed to be emptier than before. It seemed to have lost its former prosperity as well. Even the chatter in the restaurants had lessened. Everyone was living in silence, quietly paying attention to the news from the front lines. But in a certain dark place, the gangsters who had wreaked havoc in the villages were dying in batches for some unknown reason. Many of them seemed to have been killed by mystical beasts, but there were also many who had died by swords and sabers. The military spies had almost all been released by the old marshal. Previously, the old marshal's high status and authority had not been noticed, but this time around, he had hardened his heart. Anyone who bullies the families of the deployed generals, those who bullies the families of the fallen generals, those who bullies the families of the disabled generals, kill without mercy. When the old marshal had issued this order, his eyes had been bloodshot. At the same time, His Majesty's secret guards and old General Leng Daoyin's trusted subordinates were also doing the same. Yutong's punishment had also been reformulated to target this aspect. Severe punishment. Therefore, the empire of Yutong's gangsters were in deep trouble. If they went out to collect some protection fees, their heads might just fly away. This was going to be an extremely brutal tug-of-war. As for Han Sanha's Dongxian Shadow Cavalry, They had always prided themselves as the strongest troop in the world. Encountering such a strong opponent as the Steel Cavalry, they would definitely retaliate fiercely. It was difficult to judge who would emerge victorious in this battle. Reinforcements were being deployed continuously, but all of the empire's higher-ups knew that only Tai Zheng's 100,000-strong army could decide the outcome of the battle. That was the real, and also the strongest power that he could bring out at the current stage. If the 9 Supreme's lords were still here, countless Yutong citizens were thinking silently. If the 9 Supreme's lords were still here, Dongshuan's shadow cavalry would not have dared to let them out. Then, how could such a precarious situation happen? It had gradually become a trend in the empire of Yutong. Whether it was restaurants, taverns, inns or shops, there was no one who did not sigh at the mention of this matter. If the 9 Supremes were still here, would the shadow cavalry dare come? If the 9 Supremes were still here, even Han Sanhe wouldn't dare make a move. If the 9 Supremes were still here, that would be great. The Fortress of Resilience seems to be not far from Tianxian Cliff, where the 9 Sirs perished. Someone looked despondent. I really want to pay my respects to the 9 Sirs. What do you mean not far? Are you confused? Tianxian Cliff is behind the Fortress of Resilience in our country. The 9 lords were killed in the country. How is that possible? Sigh. On the 15th of July, Dongshuan's 200,000 troops fall into formation and wage the final battle against my general Taizheng. The battle is currently at a stalemate. Both sides have close to 500,000 soldiers, fighting within 3,000 miles of the Fortress of Resilience. There's no clear victor, but our army suffered heavy casualties. The news from the front lines flew in like pieces of paper. The mood of Yutong's people grew heavier as well. Everyone's heart was in their throats. The war continued to drag on. It was the 45th day of Tai Zheng's army's expedition. Yin Yang walked out of his closed-door cultivation. Now the front line was close to collapse. After Yin Yang came out, he headed east alone without a second word. A gust of wind rose in the sky. A white cloud soared into the sky, and under the urging of the rapid wind, it slowly flew away. The wind in Tiantang City grew stronger. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The old marshal looked up at Tiantang Square, at the Tiantang dragon flag that fluttered in the wind. He did not speak for a long time. This feeling was so familiar. Once upon a time, when the wind blew, the clouds surged. When the clouds surged, the thunder rumbled. When the thunder rumbled, the earth dragon soared, the golden gleam shone. The waves rose. The wood shot into the sky. The fire blazed and blood filled the sky. Now the wind was blowing again. It's a pity that the might of the 9 Supremes can hardly be seen again. The old marshal sighed with his arms behind his back, his expression bleak. In front of the Fortress of Resilience, the sounds of battle shook the heavens. As the two armies fought, the arrows above their heads were like a thunderstorm, almost never stopping. It was not hundreds or thousands of people, but tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting. Swoosh! An arrow grazed past Tai Zheng's face. Tai Zheng's expression was stoic. His eyelids did not even blink. He stood at a high point, wearing a shiny golden cloak and holding a 25 feet long spear. Beneath him was an extremely handsome Wind-Seeker Crimson Flame colt that was 5 feet long. He wore a golden helmet on his head, and a long sword hung on his waist. He stood high up on his horse, looking at the battlefield coldly. As the marshal of the 3 armies, he knew that he should be in the marshal's tent. However, facing the frenzied attack of Han Sanhe's Dongxian troop, he could only stand here. He did not budge, dressed in the most eye-catching attire. He wanted all the soldiers who were fighting to see their marshal standing there like a majestic mountain, as long as they turned their heads. He was still standing there. Even if the sky were to fall, their marshal would still be there. Tens of thousands of soldiers were fighting in front of the 2 armies. Right in front of them was an awe-inspiring cavalry. From the men to the horses, they were all black. Even in the battlefield that was filled with the sounds of battle, this troop was still as quiet as a block of ice on a high mountain. Even the horses were quiet. There was a formless, oppressive air about them. It was the calmness of those who had gone through life and death. They did not take the battle before them seriously at all. In their eyes, There was no life or death, victory or defeat, only massacre. There was a similar troop of cavalry in Yutong's army, their attire almost identical. The only difference between the Shadow Cavalry and the Steel Cavalry was that the Shadow Cavalry wore black clothes, black armor, black horses, black helmets and black robes. As for the Steel Cavalry, they only had a steel mask on top of the same attire. Only on this steel mask was there an emblem that could only be recognized by their own people. Both sides glared at each other. There was nothing else in their eyes. All the life and death on the battlefield did not matter to them at this moment. Taizheng stood proudly, his eyes brimming with murderous intent, his composure unwavering. He was like a reef in the midst of a raging storm, observing everything on the battlefield coldly as he calmly deployed his troops, maximizing the effect of each troop in his hands. Each time a new troop entered the battlefield, it was always at the enemy's weakest and weakest point. However, the enemy's immediate response often made him uncomfortable. Every one of his gestures was resolute and decisive, and his posture was filled with elegance and confidence. Each of the generals around him looked at him with reverence and fervor, executing his orders meticulously. They knew very well that not every troop could have such a marshal. Not every marshal could be so flawless. The marshal's calmness and steadiness were the reassurance of the troops. As long as such a marshal is here, we will not lose. Taizheng's expression was calm, but his heart was already frying. He knew that he could not hold on much longer. However, the enemy had yet to unleash his lethal attack. Han Sanhe had not made a move since the beginning. It was only the 3 generals under Taizheng's command who were engaged in battle. Even the 20,000 shadow cavalry in front of him was not Han Sanhe's lethal attack. He must have something else up his sleeve. But where was his next move? Taizheng's expression was calm, but his mind was racing. If the battle went on like this, it would only be a battle of attrition. However, he could not afford to do so. Taizheng knew very well that all of his reinforcements had arrived. The nation would not give him any more support from now on. In spite of this, the enemy's reinforcements were endless. Behind him was the Fortress of Resilience. If the Fortress of Resilience had never been breached, and he defended the fort, he was confident that he could repel Han Sanhe outside the fort, even if he attacked with the entire nation's strength. At the very least he could perish together with the enemy. However, the enemy had breached the Fortress of Resilience and destroyed it completely. When he led his army over, the enemy had retreated out of the Fortress of Resilience immediately. Under such circumstances, Taizheng would never dare defend the Fortress of Resilience, even if he was filled with courage. He could only confront the enemy on a field outside the Fortress of Resilience. Who knew what malicious setup the enemy had made after breaching the Fortress of Resilience? Even if there was no setup, the walls of the Fortress of Resilience had collapsed. How could he even defend the fort? The enemy had come to attack, but he had forced himself into the same situation as the enemy. There were 30,000 steel cavalry behind Taizheng. From the beginning to the end, no matter how dangerous the situation was, he had not mobilized these 30,000 steel cavalry. They would eat the best food and stay the best accommodation. If the battle were to deteriorate, these 30,000 steel cavalry would be his last trump card. Woo woo! The dull sound of a horn rang in the enemy's camp. A black torrent slowly moved, from slow to fast, gradually forming a sharp whistling sound. The uniform galloping was like a bell ringing one's soul. The moment the enemy's horn rang, Taizheng waved his hand without hesitation. The war drums sounded at the same time. 5,000 steel cavalry moved in unison behind the military formation. On the battlefield, both troops were like raging black dragons, galloping silently towards each other. Not a single person from the 2 armies let out a hoarse roar like that. Not even a grunt could be heard. They charged forward in silence, their eyes filled with a frenzied will to fight and a reckless murderous intent. The 2 troops of cavalry that were like raging dragons collided with a loud bang amidst the silence. At that moment, Taizheng, who was on one side, and Dongshuan's general who was watching the battle from a high vantage point narrowed their eyes. Waves of blood rose into the air. Elite against elite. The shadow cavalry was expressionless. ignoring their comrades who fell off their steeds one after another. They held their weapons in their hands, attacking and charging forward in a frenzy. Every member of the steel cavalry wore an iron mask and remained silent as well. This was a battlefield. Everything was decided by weapons. Life and death were the deciding factor. Swoosh, swoosh. The leader of Yutong's steel cavalry was Wu Jundao, the assistant commander of the steel cavalry. The steel spear in his hand shot out like raindrops, glimmering like stars as black silhouettes were picked up and dropped. His warhorse did not stop for a moment as he led his subordinates, charging into the enemy's base like a sharp knife. The enemy followed the same strategy, charging straight into the steel cavalry's camp. Other than the sound of weapons clashing, everything was silent. Both sides were advancing. Both sides were dying. Bang! Chapter 83. All the soldiers who had fallen off their horses were turned into minced meat in an instant. Streaks of blood splashed and splattered. Watching from afar, one could see that after the two cavalries collided, the arms of the cavalries were detached from their bodies and flew into the air. Heads kept spinning in the air like frogs jumping out of the water before falling to the ground. There were constantly flying bodies that flew up, splattered with blood, and then fell to the ground. Wu Jundao charged forward with all his might. Suddenly, he felt his body relax. The pressure was gone. His eyes were wide open as he charged out of the enemy's cavalry formation. Behind him, the steel cavalry that was still organized charged out at the same time. Wu Jundao raised his spear diagonally. His warhorse galloped and made a circle, aiming at the enemy's cavalry formation again. Without a word, he charged forward once more. Life and death depended on this moment. Victory or defeat depended on this moment as well. High above, Taizheng raised his arm abruptly and hollered, "Yutong's steel cavalry!" His voice was like rumbling thunder that swept across the battlefield. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers roared at the same time. Unrivaled in the world. This was the first time the steel cavalry had made a sound since the battle began. It was under their marshal's lead. Drumbeats reverberated from the enemy's formation at the same time. A cruel smile hung on Taizheng's face. He was just a tad faster. The marshal's deafening roar was undoubtedly a boost to the soldiers' morale. Yutong's steel cavalry went into a frenzy as they roared at the same time. Yutong's steel cavalry, unrivaled in the world. They charged towards Dongshuan's shadow cavalry. In the enemy's camp, the general who was commanding the troops wore a grim expression, sweat dripping from the tip of his nose. A lean elder stood with his arms behind his back as he watched the battlefield and said faintly, "The shadow cavalry has lost this battle. Sound the gongs to retreat." "Marshal." The general was indignant. "A defeat is a defeat." The lean elder said coldly, "Sound the gongs to retreat." Yes, the enemy's formation was retreating, but the two cavalries that were entangled did not separate so easily. They were still biting and killing each other as they broke through the enemy's formation and returned to their own. The ground was littered with bloodied corpses. "Do you know why you lost?" The old man's eyes were filled with wisdom. "I was too slow." The general lowered his head in shame. "Not bad." The scrawny elder was Dongshuan's god of war, Han Sanha. "Our shadow cavalry is basically the same as the enemy's steel cavalry, the most elite combat force. Both sides will suffer and perish together. However, your command failed. In this battle, our side had sent out 5,000 cavalrymen, while the other side had also sent out 5,000. The other side had returned with 3,000 to 4,000 men, but the number of our brothers who returned was at least 500 less than the other side. Why is that?" When they broke through the formation and regrouped, Taizheng seized the opportunity. His roar spurred the army to cheer. This was the morale. At that point in time, the cavalries of both sides are already like arrows at the end of their flight. The only thing that can support them is their morale. The side with the highest morale would win. On the other hand, the enemy made the first move. Their cavalry's morale soared, and we were a step behind, so our morale was suppressed. In the first wave, the number of casualties on both sides was similar. The hundreds of casualties on our side only happened after the second wave of morale was suppressed. You're not Taizheng's opponent. The scrawny elder said faintly. There's another reason for your defeat. Taizheng was always standing there. His soldiers could see him. As for you, your soldiers couldn't see you. The general is the soldier's courage. The general's courage is the soul of an army. Therefore, your defeat in this battle is well deserved. Han Sanhe sighed softly. Taizheng is indeed a generational talent. The general beside him was already ashamed. After this battle, the shadow cavalry can't enter the battlefield for a short period of time. Their morale has been suppressed. We have to find a chance to turn the tables before we can continue fighting. Otherwise, when we face the steel cavalry again, the enemy's psychological advantage is already formed. It's bound to be a great defeat. For 45 consecutive days, the three of you have taken turns to fight Taizheng. Out of the three of you, half of you have lost. Han Sanhe narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at the battlefield. It looks like this old man will have to fight personally. This lowly general is ashamed. I'm willing to lead the army. This isn't military law. This battle is meant to train the soldiers. Han Sanhe said coldly. The three of you have been fighting openly and covertly within the nation, fighting for the title of the top general of the younger generation. This battle is to let you see how far you're from being a famed general. I hope you remember the countless heroic souls that have died because of your mistakes in this battle. Han Sanhe looked at the general and the other two generals who were standing straight as he said word by word. This time, we're using human lives to train the soldiers for you. I want you to remember that in front of a true famed general, you're not even worth a fart. If you don't improve, it's only a matter of time before you die on this battlefield. Han Sanhe's voice was cold. The three generals were flushed, lowering their heads as if they were about to crawl into a hole in the ground. This is what it means to build a general's success on the bones of thousands. Han Sanhe went up to the podium with a grim expression. A huge flag suddenly flew up in the wind from Dongxuan's camp. It fluttered wildly in the air. Han, the entire Dongxian army, hundreds of thousands of men, howled loudly. The soldiers cheered in unison, their voices shaking the air. On the other side, Taizheng's expression froze. Han Sanhe was finally going to fight personally. He had raised the flag specifically to tell him that he had already seen him as an opponent who could threaten him. I will fight with all my might. This was Han Sanhe's respect for his opponent. However, this respect made Taizheng's heart skip a beat. He would rather Han Sanhe underestimate him and look down on him than face him in such a serious manner. The pressure was immense. Orders came continuously from the enemy's camp. The battle on the battlefield was forcefully stopped by the enemy as all the combatants returned to their ranks. The flags fluttered, blanketing the sky and earth. The wind howled as the flags fluttered like dragons within 100 miles. Han Sanhe had only reorganized his troops, but the entire Dongxian army took on a different atmosphere at once. Whether it was their aura, their will to fight, or their murderous intent, they seemed to have been elevated by several levels at once. This was the invincible confidence that an unparalleled general of his generation had brought to his troops. The soldiers' instinctive fear of the battlefield was completely erased from their hearts when Han Sanhe personally commanded them. Taizheng sucked in a deep breath in the face of the overwhelming aura and gave the order at the same time. The entire army retreated to defend. Although he knew that such a decision would put him at a disadvantage, Taizheng could only do so in the face of such an overwhelming aura. If they were to fight now, their defeat would be certain. The enemy's aura was blazing. It was only an appearance without any order to attack, but it had already forced Taizheng to change his formation, to switch from offense to defense. There was no pride on Han Sanhe's face, only calmly and methodically issuing his orders. Countless troops began to move from all directions, attacking Yutong's Yutong troop in a chaotic but orderly manner. They came and went, advancing and retreating, coming from the east and west, fighting from the north and south. Taizheng utilized his brain's calculation ability to its maximum, countering every move that came his way and fighting back. Arrows. Time passed by slowly. Although Taizheng was still as calm as ever, he was already powerless. For 3 consecutive days, Han Sanhe had been attacking continuously, using all sorts of methods from all directions. Sneak attacks, ambushes, fire attacks. It was a comprehensive collection of tactics. Nibbling tactics. This was the nibbling tactics that Han Sanha had used to strike fear into the hearts of the famed generals of various countries. Nibbling away at your men bit by bit. No matter how you defended, I had my ways to bite you bit by bit. Tai Jing's troops were forced to retreat again and again. However, after 3 days, he realized that the enemy had already completed half of the encirclement. Furthermore, all of the formidable military force was laid out in front of him. This was obviously the stance of a pursuit. Facing such a situation, all that was left was a head-on battle. In spite of this, Tai Jung had no confidence in winning a head-on battle. If he lost, he could only retreat. However, once he did so, the 50,000 shadow cavalry that had not moved would come crashing in like a tsunami. By then, if he insisted on fleeing, Han Sanha might take advantage of the situation and pursue him all the way to Tiantang City. The continent's god of war lives up to his reputation. Tai Jung sighed deeply. His heart was helpless. Unknowingly, he had not even noticed how the enemy had set up the ambush. But the catastrophe had come so suddenly. There was nothing left out in all directions. Marshal, the soldier who was in charge of the lookout, cried out in terror from the top of the mountain. What is it? Why are you panicking? Tai Jung was furious. However, he was stunned as well. Behind him, a troop of cavalry had appeared out of nowhere. There were at least tens of thousands of people in the crowd. The Dongxian Steel Cavalry. Since when had they come to his back? Tai Jung was utterly disheartened as he turned to look at the enemy's formation. Han Sanha still did not show himself, but Tai Jung knew that he was doomed. Han Sanha's relentless attacks these few days were actually for this hidden pawn. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen were cutting off his retreat. While he was busy dealing with the enemy's simultaneous attacks from dozens of sides, this troop of cavalry had actually circled behind him. There was no way forward and no way back. Han Sanha was obviously trying to strangle the empire of Yutong's military force. Now the enemy was attacking from all sides, and the tempo was picking up. It was obvious that the enemy's final attack was about to begin. Once the final attack began, it would be a thunderous one. Tai Jung was trying his best to think of a way to escape this fate of certain defeat and death. If he were to be defeated, the empire of Yutong's eastern border would fall completely. However, even as he thought about it, his temples throbbing, he could not think of any countermeasure. Han Sanha's attacks were dense and omnipresent. It was impossible to defend against them. Marshal, the guard who was on the lookout suddenly cried out in delight. Marshal, Dongxuan's troop is suddenly in chaos in the southwest. There seems to be a battle. Tai Jung was stunned. Southwest? He had always wanted to break out from that direction and defend the mountain there. But Dongxian had obviously seen this as well. The defense of the southwest was like an iron bucket. How could there be a battle there? Chapter 84. Tai Jung turned to take a look. Thick smoke billowed into the sky. The sounds of battle could be heard clearly from dozens of miles away. It sounded like a large-scale battle was taking place. Tai Jung could only feel his heart thumping in his chest, his lips slightly parched. Give the order, signal the flag. Ask what's going on. However, before they could do anything, there were already 9 plumes of thick smoke billowing into the sky. There was no fire, no smoke. Our men. Tai Jung felt like his heart was about to leap out of his chest. Where did this reinforcement come from? Dongxuan's Han Sanha had noticed the commotion in the southwest as well. With a command, 10,000 cavalrymen charged over like an arrow. Charge! Tai Jung was decisive. This was their only chance, their only way out of this predicament. Gather there to Tianxian Cliff. Now even if there were reinforcements, their defeat was already set in stone. What he could do was to build a new line of defense at Tianxian Cliff, using the terrain and the mountains to hold out for as long as he could. The great battle broke out without any warning at this moment. Tai Jung took the field personally, leading the entire army to break through the encirclement towards the southwest. Han Sanha had not thought of this beforehand, and Tai Jung had never expected to attack this direction either. Both sides were beyond their expectations. The brutality of this battle was even more beyond imagination. Yutong's steel cavalry. Taizheng roared and took the lead. The 30,000 steel cavalry that Taizheng had not used since the beginning moved together. They turned into a giant hammer and smashed over. Dongshuan's 50,000 shadow cavalry moved at the same time. The 30,000 shadow cavalry behind Yutong's army, to cut off their retreat, reacted a beat too late, only beginning to charge. Before this, no one had thought that there would be a loophole in the most unlikely place. Yutong's 200,000 men broke through the siege. Dongxian gathered their superior military strength to stop them. Han Sanhe was stationed in the center of the troop, deploying his troops and issuing orders continuously. Taizheng, on the other hand, was charging towards them with bloodshot eyes, not changing his direction. Both sides had a clear goal. If these 200,000 men retreated to the west of Tianxian Cliff without any casualties, the Empire of Yutong could still retain its strength and fight. However, if they could keep these 200,000 soldiers here, the Empire of Yutong would suffer a great loss. Han Sanhe had plotted this for so long. How could he let Taizheng escape? Taizheng took the lead, crushing all who stood in his way. His 25 feet long spear turned into countless shadows that exploded in the air. Everywhere he passed, there was absolutely no one who could withstand a single blow. His horse had already turned into a whirlwind as he led the 30,000 cavalrymen forward with an irresistible force. It was a stance of fighting for their lives. On the other side, some unknown troop was also rushing over with all their might to assist Taizheng in breaking out of the siege. The desperation on the other side was even greater than that on this side. The frenzied charge of Yutong's army brought the entire battle to its climax in an instant. Taizheng charged forward in a frenzy. Charge! Kill them all! This was their only chance. Where did this troop come from? Han Sanhe's clear face was filled with doubt as well. He knew the Empire of Yutong's troop movements like the back of his hand. There was no longer any support for Taizheng. How could such a troop appear out of nowhere? Taizheng sprinted for dozens of miles, and was finally close to the battlefield in front of him. However, the moment he saw the battlefield before him, his heart skipped a beat. His eyes were rimmed red as hot tears rolled down his cheeks. Kill them all. Regroup with the brothers. On the other side was a group of crippled soldiers wearing old military uniforms and armors. Whether it was the commanding officer or the soldiers, they were either blinded in one eye or had a broken arm. They were shouting in unison, fighting ferociously as they charged forward. Yutong is undefeated. Yutong is unrivaled. I am Yutong's man. I shall die fighting for the country. Save Marshal Tai. Brothers, it's time to fight for our lives. The crippled soldiers charged forward in a frenzy. They did not evade at all, exchanging their lives for their own. You slash me, I'll slash you back. I'm already crippled, I can't fight you. All I can do is fight for my life. An old soldier charged forward with a guffaw. Two Dongxian soldiers slashed at him with their sabers. The old soldier did not evade. Instead, his eyes widened as he roared. Men are not here to fight. Men are here to fight for our lives. He welcomed the two sabers with his neck and chest while the sabers in his hands slashed down ferociously. Blood sprayed into the sky as three heads fell together. Another crippled soldier who was blinded in one eye jumped down from the high ground to face the sharp sabers and spears, pouncing forward. His body was pierced, but his saber had also chopped off a Dongxian soldier's head in a frenzy. Marshal Tai, over here! The crippled soldiers roared as they charged forward with their lives on the line. Our lives aren't worth anything anymore. We're just waiting for our deaths at the back. A crippled general cried out. Marshal Tai, the Empire of Yutong can't do without you. We have no regrets dying in front of the 9 Supremes Lords Tianxian Cliff. We have no regrets following the 9 Supremes Lords. Taizheng's tears of blood flowed. Kill them all. Kill them all. Don't let our brothers die in vain. He hollered madly. Right before the valley, he suddenly leaped down from his horse's back, charging towards the enemy's formation like a mad tiger. His spear rained down in a circular arc that gleamed coldly. Hundreds of Dongxian soldiers were killed with a single thrust of his spear. The gap had been opened. Charge! I'll cover the retreat. Yutong's steel cavalry surged out from the gap. Taizheng had gone mad. When he saw the crippled soldiers, he had completely lost his rationality. These old brothers were using their lives to pave the way for the army. They did not have a unified commander. Although their numbers were considerable, they lacked coordination. They could only use such a barbaric and cruel method to realize their value in battle. How can I, Taizheng, use my old brothers' lives to exchange for my own? I'll open this gap with all of you. Taizheng roared. When the 25-feet-long spear was swung, not a single drop of water could enter within 100 feet radius. Since the marshal was covering the retreat, Yutong's troops knew that the opportunity could not be missed, galloping in along the path. When each of the generals saw their troops charging over, they returned immediately without exception to accompany Taizheng and cover the army's retreat. I'll be the general. I'll fight to the death for my brothers. I'll be the general. I can't just use my brothers' lives to accumulate merit. I'll be the general. There were more and more Yutong generals following Taizheng, all of them looking stern as they killed in a frenzy. They were like a steel wall that blocked Dongxuan's pursuit. In the enemy's formation, a cold voice rang out. Shadow cavalry. Charge over and crush them all. The enemies who were fighting all around suddenly split into two sides with a swoosh. Behind them, countless valiant black knights were like demons bursting out of the darkness. With the pressure of a mountain, they charged over ferociously. Taizheng's gaze was resolute. Marshal. Hundreds of soldiers charged towards the shadow cavalry in a frenzy. Go. Fire your arrows. With the command from the other side, the sky suddenly darkened. At this moment, hundreds of thousands of sharp arrows completely covered the sky. Go. The remaining soldiers in the valley charged out at the same time, charging towards the shadow cavalry and the arrows that blotted out the sky. Taizheng, if you don't go, our brothers won't be able to rest in peace. Heart-wrenching roars rang out. Taizheng's entire body was dyed red with blood. He howled in despair as the two assistant generals pulled him back with all their might. Marshal, go quickly. We still have a chance after we cross Tianxian Cliff. Taizheng's eyes were bulging so hard that they were about to tear, blood flowing out. His tears were mixed with the fresh blood as he finally roared. Go! Go! The shrill roar was like the howl of a wounded beast in the wilderness. Han Sanha. Taizheng's voice rang through the land. If I, Taizheng, don't die, I will kill you. I will kill you. The army had retreated into the valley. However, Han Sanha's Dongxian troop was chasing after them in a frenzy, as if they had risked their lives, almost biting the tail of Yutong's army. Shadow cavalry, even if we have to run to our deaths, we must not lose Taizheng's army. This was Han Sanha's absolute command. This god of war had a cold heart that was beyond anyone's imagination. He was ruthless to the enemy, but he was merciless to his own soldiers as well. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as they pursued Taizheng's defeated army, Yutong's military force would crumble completely. Even if Yutong still remained in the world after this war, the natural barrier of Yutong would be lost and half of its territory would be lost. It would also be removed from the ranks of the 5 empires. It would then be reduced to a weak force at the mercy of others. Han Sanha had decided that he would not give Taizheng a chance to regroup his army, no matter the cost. All members of the Shadow Cavalry attacked Taizheng. The countless remaining soldiers opened up a path spontaneously, allowing their brothers to enter, but they did not move. There's no use in a crippled body. Cover the army with your life. Countless remaining soldiers used their lives to initiate a spontaneous charge, charging forward in a frenzy against the enemy army that was coming at them from all directions. Even if they could only delay the enemy by a single step, they had to charge forward. Brothers who have fallen in battle back then. Someone hollered, "I'm coming. Brothers, you're all here." A burly man bellowed, waving his saber with his remaining arm as his muscular body charged forward like an iron tower. Brothers, families, I, Du Haizi, can't do my best anymore in the future, but your father is happy to see all of you. I have no regrets. Ha ha ha. Hundreds of remaining soldiers guffawed together, raising their sabers as they charged into the enemy's formation. No regrets for the Empire. No regrets for the family. No regrets for the brothers. On the other side was a cliff. On the cliff, the 800 remaining soldiers had thrown all the rocks they had collected down. But they still could not stop Dongxuan's army. Suddenly an order was issued. One man, one saber, stop them with our lives. The 800 remaining soldiers formed groups of 50 men, jumping down from the 300 feet high cliff with bloodshot eyes and sabers in their hands. It was just that there was no chance of survival at this height. They had treated their bodies as rolling logs and boulders with sabers. If I can kill one of them, it's my gain. If I can crush one of them, it's my gain. If I can't kill or crush them to death, I'll King fall as a rock to stop your advance. Taizheng's tears of blood flowed. There were a few times when he wanted to cry out and die fighting here. However, he did not even have the chance to reorganize his troops. Being chased from the back, Taizheng had wanted to reorganize his troops several times, but it was too late. The shadow cavalry was less than 1,000 feet behind them. If they were to stop and reorganize at such a distance, a single charge from the enemy could annihilate all of them. They could only run to a safe distance. However, how could the enemy give them such a safe distance? The forest on both sides was dense. The weeds were overgrown beneath their feet, almost reaching their waists. The northwest wind howled, almost blowing at them as they ran. Tianxian Cliff. They had arrived at Tianxian Cliff. Taizheng cried into the sky. Tianxian Cliff. The 9 Supremes have sacrificed themselves here. Do I, Taizheng, have to die fighting here as well? So what if I, Taizheng, die fighting? I hate that hundreds of millions of Yutong's people are going to perish under Dongxuan's shadow cavalry. I, Taizheng, die with everlasting regret. 9 Supremes. If you can see this from the heavens, save Yutong. Save Yutong. Taizheng cried in despair, spitting a mouthful of fresh blood. At the corner, countless silhouettes of the shadow cavalry had appeared in a flash. In the dark, 40 to 50 phantom-like silhouettes appeared. Without a sound, the cold gleam of their swords and sabers formed a bright circle around Taizheng. Dark shadows. Taizheng was exhausted, but he suddenly guffawed. Your father has long heard of Dongxuan's dark shadows. Come on. He bellowed and took large strides forward. The people in the dark shadows fell from all directions without a word. With a roar, Taizheng counterattacked swiftly with his long sword. However, he was a general after all. Facing such martial world experts, he was obviously no match for them. In the blink of an eye, his body was already riddled with wounds. Martial. Dozens of janissaries sprung up and welcomed the sabers and swords with their own bodies in the air, blocking the sudden attack for Taizheng. Fresh blood splattered. Warm drops of blood fell on Taizheng's face. Taizheng bellowed, his eyes wide with rage, his heart aching so much that he almost stopped breathing. Another dozen of janissaries charged forward with all their might. In the dark night, a coarse laughter rang out. Marshal, don't forget me for the wedding wine. In the next moment, the person who said this had already plunged his saber into the enemy's chest, and the enemy's head flew high into the air with a flash of cold light. In the dark night, only the whistling of sabers and swords could be heard, and the sound of blood spurting could be heard. Taizheng's body swayed, and he fell to the ground. Beside him, a guard breathed with difficulty. There was a ghastly wound between his waist and abdomen, his intestines almost popping out as blood gushed out. Brother. Taizheng tore off a piece of his shirt with difficulty, wanting to bandage his wound. Marshal. The wounded soldier on the ground suddenly bellowed and sprung up with all his might, pushing Taizheng aside. A saber fell like lightning and sliced into his abdomen. Taizheng roared and slashed the assassin from head to toe in a frenzy. He then turned to look at the wounded soldier. Brother. Marshal. The wounded soldier smiled. Don't forget me for the wedding wine. I wanted to congratulate Marshal with my unparalleled military merit. I'm sorry. His head tilted to the side, and he stopped breathing. Yes. Brother. Drink as much as you want. Taizheng's eyes were brimming with hot tears, his voice choking. Brother, my brother. Countless personal guards rushed forward and fought with the enemy in the darkness of the night. The sound of metal blades slicing through the air was endless. Outside the valley, the rumbling of hooves was getting closer. The shadow cavalry had arrived. Yutong's steel cavalry who were retreating suddenly reined in their horses in unison, their faces solemn. "Marshal, let's fight!" Tens of thousands of people shouted at the same time, their eyes bloodshot. "Fight!" Taizheng stood up with difficulty, his muscular body drenched in blood from top to bottom. He murmured to himself, then suddenly roared. "Let's fight! I, Taizheng, have let down my brothers in this life. Let us fight to the death together. Beneath the ground, we shall unite our troops and fight again." "It's the brothers who have let down Marshal." An assistant general's voice was choking. "We wanted to congratulate Marshal with our unparalleled military merit. It's too bad that we brothers have let down Marshal. Sister-in-law is the one who has let down the most." "Sister-in-law?" Taizheng's gaze froze. The frail silhouette leaning against the door seemed to have suddenly appeared before him. "The battlefield is perilous, take care." "Yes, Jenner. When I come back, I'll take you as my wife. I want the entire army, the entire nation's people to celebrate our victory, to celebrate our wedding. I'll wait for you." Taizheng laughed forlornly at the sky. He had joined the army when he was young. His military career was long and arduous. It was only when he was 39 years old that he finally had the thought of starting a family. Who would have thought that it would all be for naught? The enemy's hooves thundered in his ears, their cries deafening. "Don't think you can escape, Taizheng. Kill." The gentle face gradually faded from Taizheng's sight, turning into the swaying scenery far away. "After I die, find a good husband. But remember, don't look for someone from the army." He turned around, his face had already become cold and hard. His spear propped on the ground, like a towering mountain, he shouted, "Fight! Fight!" The soldiers of the army roared in unison, their eyes filled with blood. "Prepare to recoup your losses. Brothers, prepare yourselves." Taizheng laughed, still as heroic as ever. In his eyes, the gentle silhouette had finally turned into smoke and dissipated. What was left was a steely murderess courting death. 500 feet away, a troop of Dongshuan's shadow cavalry had appeared, the gleam of their sabers and spears gleaming coldly in the night. "All of you," Taizheng hollered, his voice shaking the air. "Yes." Tens of thousands of troops shouted in unison. Just as Taizheng was about to give the order, his spear pointed forward, and a battle to the death was about to leave his mouth. He stopped abruptly, his entire body stiffening. This was because it was at this very moment. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew down from Tianxian Cliff. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The northwest wind that had been raging suddenly changed its direction. It blew in the opposite direction. The howling of the wind grew louder and louder. The shrill sound of the wind turned into the howl of the devil. The trees of the entire forest bent in unison, sweeping towards the shadow cavalry. Tianxian Cliff's unique terrain had actually turned into a lethal trap. A lethal trap for Dongxian. Taizheng's heart skipped a beat. So did all the Yutong soldiers. The scene was so familiar. Could it be, could it be? Chapter 85. A fierce wind suddenly rose in the opposite direction. With a whoosh, the wind suddenly reached its peak. The weeds on the road flew up violently, and the branches on the trees suddenly snapped. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. As for Yutong's soldiers, they were not affected at all. Taizheng's face was drenched in blood and tears, but he stood still as if he had suddenly stiffened. His eyes were like bronze bells as he stared in the direction of Tianxian Cliff. 9 Supremes! Supreme Wind is here? As the sound of the wind reached its peak, a ball of fire suddenly shot up into the sky from behind Taizheng. The fire soared into the sky, spreading towards Dongshuan's army at an unbelievable speed. Just as the fire appeared, it had already scorched hundreds of feet into the air. The Dongxian shadow cavalry that had just charged over, numbering up to 1,000 men, were instantly engulfed in the sea of fire. The rest of the cavalrymen were urging their horses to gallop with all their might. They simply could not stop in time, and crashed into the fire one after another. Immediately, miserable cries rang out from all directions. The fire crackled like a demon's before it soared into the sky with a boom and spread across the plains. Dongxuan's army within a 300-mile radius was suddenly engulfed in a frenzied sea of fire. There seemed to be a demon laughing in the flames. How dare a Dongxian brat act so presumptuously in front of Tianxian Cliff? The wind howled. Raging flames rushed to the heavens. Supreme wind and flame. Hundreds of thousands of Yutong's soldiers were teary-eyed. Looking at the silent Tianxian Cliff, they suddenly knelt down in unison. 9 Supreme's lords. With a roar, the voices of these hot-blooded men who were walking the line between life and death choked. Hot tears swirling in the air. Han Sanhe looked to the southwest where Taizheng had already broken through the siege. The shadow cavalry had already chased after them. 30,000 shadow cavalry flanking and 50,000 pursuing. Han Sanhe was certain that Taizheng would not stand a chance against such a fearless charge. Even if it was him, there was absolutely no way for him to regroup and fight again under such circumstances and turn defeat into victory. The outcome of this battle was already decided. After planning for so long, it was finally time to reap the harvest. Fortunately, the 9 Supremes were no longer around. Otherwise, faced with the complicated terrain of the Empire of Yutong and the presence of existences like the 9 Supremes, they would not have dared to advance recklessly, because they didn't know when they would be ambushed. Moreover, he would lose in a baffling manner. Marshal, Yutong has almost completely lost to you this time. The general at the side had an excited look on his face. Only the marshal can accomplish this feat of expanding our territory. Han Sanhe smiled calmly and said, "This old man has spared no expense in military strength in this battle. I've forcefully annihilated Taizheng's 100,000 troops and 200,000 reinforcements. It's still too early to say that I'm expanding my territory. However, the Empire of Yutong's energy won't be able to recover for at least 10 years after this battle. Our army's biggest gain should be pushing our territory 2,000 miles forward, right towards Yutong's capital. But we can't say that these are already in our hands." There was a deep yearning in Han Sanhe's eyes. Because there are still 2 old men in the Empire of Yutong who have yet to make a move. Although Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin are known as the saber and sword duo, they haven't led an army for so many years. Besides, they're getting on in years and are no longer what they used to be. Marshal will definitely be able to do it. A general at the side fawned over him. Yes, the Empire of Yutong's elites have been defeated by the marshal after this battle. Even if Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin are the saber and sword duo, what can they do when they have no soldiers to use? Han Sanhe said faintly. Perhaps Mu Wuyun's lack of soldiers makes sense. But Gao Han, you said that they are no longer what they used to be. You have to pay attention. As a general, you must never underestimate the enemy at any time. This is a fatal thing and the cause of defeat. The 2 generals beside him bowed at the same time. This lowly general will remember it. Even if they have no soldiers to use, these 2 old men can still defend Yutong and contend with me for 3 to 5 years. Han Sanhe's expression was bleak. Because the Emperor of Yutong trusts these 2 people without reservation. Behind him, Mu Wuyun, Gao Han, and Zhang Ge were silent, not daring to say a word. The old marshal's meritorious deeds were enough to intimidate the emperor. Dongxuan's emperor was extremely wary of the old marshal now. This was no longer a secret in the military. Han Sanhe's words were, of course, spoken from the bottom of his heart. After this battle, Dongxuan's unshakable foundation can be established. Han Sanhe said bleakly. Yutong can be crippled, can be weak, but it cannot be destroyed. It's like a ferocious tiger. We only need to knock out its claws and teeth. That will be enough. If the empire were to be annihilated, Dongxian would immediately become a public enemy. Han Sanhe stood with his arms behind his back, looking at the deafening battle cries from afar as he uttered word by word. We would fall into the same situation as Yutong, surrounded by enemies from all sides. Marshal is wise. If Yutong were to be annihilated, we might not be able to hold on as long as Yutong. Han Sanhe sighed. Yutong has 3 famed marshals after all. That's why they can hold on for so long. Yutong alone has 3 of the top 10 famed generals in the continent. However, Tai Zheng and his trusted generals must die. There was respect in Han Sanha's eyes as he said slowly, "In the last battle, Tai Zheng has brought up the rear personally, and all the generals have stayed behind to bring up the rear for the army. He has won over Yutong's military heart. With time, he will become the true soul of the army. After this battle, Tai Zheng will rise to the same position as Qiu Jianhan and Leng Douyin in Yutong's military, perhaps even higher. Besides, Tai Zheng is young and strong. That's the scariest thing. Therefore, no one can die in this battle, but Tai Zheng must. Otherwise, he'll be a huge threat to us." Han Sanha's evaluation of Tai Zheng had gone up 3 notches after this battle. The southwest wind howled. The 3 generals felt that Han Sanha's lean silhouette was like a celestial being at this moment. He could summon clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. It was at this moment that the wind seemed to have stopped. Han Sanha frowned and asked faintly, "Why has the wind stopped?" Han Sanha frowned and asked faintly, "Why did the wind stop?" The 3 generals looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. This old man observed the sky at night. The southwest wind has been blowing strongly for the past few days. It's the best time to pursue an attack. Our army is going with the wind, so it's the right time. Why did the wind stop? While he was speaking, suddenly the wind blew again, and he felt a sharp pain in his face. The wind changed direction. Han Sanha's expression changed. The world knows about the death of the 9 Supremes, but Supreme Wind isn't here. Why did the wind suddenly change direction? Han Sanha's eyes were filled with uncertainty. Just as Zhang Xian was about to speak, the wind had already grown stronger and stronger. The wind was so strong that people could barely stand. There's definitely something fishy about this. Han Sanha frowned deeply. "Send the order. Ask the pursuing army to slow down." This decision was extremely difficult to make. This was because if they followed up with the attack, they could completely annihilate Tai Zheng. However, if he gave up and slowed down, it would give Tai Zheng a chance to catch his breath. This caused another variable to appear in this battle. "Marshal, please reconsider," Zhang Ge said. "The death of the 9 Supremes is undeniable. The change in the wind's direction is only due to the might of heaven and earth. The enemy has already been defeated. It's impossible." Han Sanha felt a sense of dread growing within him as he said decisively, "As long as there's something fishy on the battlefield, there must be a reason. Send the order immediately." The horn rang. However, just as the horn rang, Han Sanha's expression changed drastically, because up ahead, thick smoke suddenly soared into the sky, and raging flames surged. In the blink of an eye, the towering inferno had burned through hundreds of miles of forest. It had only been a blink of an eye, but the intensity of the fire had doubled. The next step was an earth-shattering blaze that soared into the sky. Supreme wind and flame. Han Sanha's expression changed. "Retreat at once." However, it was too late. All the soldiers who had entered the canyon were engulfed in the inferno. The inferno was like a living fire dragon, charging out of the canyon and engulfing the tens of thousands of men nearby, toppling mountains and overturning seas. It continued to spread at an extremely fast speed. Tianxian Cliff's unique terrain, the forest of towering trees, had turned into a merciless sea of fire that devoured human lives at the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. How could this be? Disbelief colored Han Sanha's eyes. The 9 Supremes were dead. The news was so accurate that some of his men had even witnessed the deaths of the 9 Supremes with their own eyes. They had personally participated in the deaths of the 9 Supremes. How could they still be here? Hundreds of miles away, the heat wave from the fire was still searing to his cheeks. All of this was like a dream, unbelievable. Yet it was happening right before his eyes. A gust of wind and fire had turned an army of 200,000 men into nothingness. What pained Han Sanha the most was the 80,000 shadow cavalry. "Retreat! Assemble! Count! Clear the losses!" Han Sanha ordered through gritted teeth. "Give up on the pursuit. Shift to defense. This battle has been lost. Retreat, return to defense immediately. Defend the border Lunar Wall Fortress. Abandon the westward strategy immediately." As Han Sanha finished speaking, his skinny frame stood on the peak of the mountain. Suddenly, his face paled and he swayed. This battle was too much for him to accept. He knew that the 9 Supremes were dead. That was why he had accepted His Majesty's order to lead the army here. He had not expected that they would fall into a vicious trap in this battle. The 9 Supremes were not dead. Supreme Wind and Flame had attacked and killed hundreds of thousands of Dongxuan's elites in just one battle. If they dared to advance recklessly under such terrain, if the other Supremes were still around, even if the 400,000 men were to be wiped out, it would not be surprising at all. Han Sanha gritted his teeth, a sharp murderous glint in his eyes. Who was it that provided such absurd and erroneous information? Investigate it when we return. The 9 Supremes were dead, and the empires of the continent were recuperating, replenishing the resources that had been damaged by the previous years of war. This was not the time to send troops, but the empire had to. Now they found out that the 9 Supremes were not dead. Had they used 200,000 men as a test? The doubt rose instinctively in Han Sanha's heart. Thick smoke billowed 800 miles in front of him, as flames soared into the sky. Countless men and horses were like fireballs, rolling and screaming amidst the conflagration. Some of them fell silent as they rolled, but the flames were still burning fiercely. Han Sanha closed his eyes dejectedly. After a long time, he uttered word by word. This war is the shame of this old man's life. Not only had they been defeated, they might have been set up. The empire of Dongxian had retreated. However, Taizheng had already reached his limit and was unable to pursue them. What a joke! It was already a blessing to be able to survive Han Sanha's relentless attacks. Moreover, the empire of Dongxian was not defeated. Their troops were organized and their combat power was complete. If they were to pursue them, they would definitely be bitten. In spite of this, Yutong's army was in high spirits now. A strong gust of wind and a great fire had driven the enemy back. Such a situation was nothing short of a miracle. What was even more exhilarating was that the 9 Supremes had appeared again. The 9 Supremes have shown themselves. Someone's eyes were brimming with tears. T. Someone was enraged. The 9 Supremes aren't dead, they're just hiding. Taizheng panted for a long time before he stood up. His head was dizzy. His feet felt like he was stepping on cotton. His wounds were still bleeding profusely. His janissaries came forward to stop the bleeding in a flurry. But he did not seem to feel it at all, his eyes lost. After a long time, he shuddered and suddenly cried out. Where are the 9 Supremes? This General Taizheng would like to thank the 9 Supremes lords for saving my life. Please allow me to lend you a helping hand. Everyone held their breaths as soon as the words left his mouth. Even those who were severely injured gritted their teeth, not making a single sound. Their gazes were fervent as they craned their necks to look straight at Tianxian Cliff. How they wished that the 9 mysterious masked figures would step out from the forest. That would be the happiest thing for Yutong's warriors. Countless people were panting like bellows, feeling their blood boiling. They were just waiting for the 9 Supremes to appear, so that they could cheer at once. The flames were blazing, the wind was howling, and the crackling of burning was incessant. Other than that, there was no other sound. Taizheng did not give up as he called out. 9 Supremes lords! Taizheng requests an audience. There was still no sound, the forest was silent. There was no response. Taizheng sighed. Reorganize the army, check the damage, treat the wounded, return to the Fortress of Resilience at the fastest speed. Gather the people to help rebuild the Fortress of Resilience immediately. Deputy Marshals, you will be in charge of these matters. Send the battle report to the capital at once. Also, investigate the Empire of Dongxuan's movements. Do not slack off. The deputy marshal nodded in acknowledgement. What about you, Marshal? Taizheng sighed. I'm tired, I want to rest here. The deputy marshal was well aware of this. He knew that the marshal had not given up on meeting the 9 Supremes. If there were too many people, the 9 Supremes would not appear. Perhaps, if there were too few people, the 9 Supremes would come out to meet them? Also, Taizheng closed his eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks. Clean up the corpses of our brothers. Before he could finish, he spat out another mouthful of blood, his heart wrenching with pain. Yes, The deputy marshal kept quiet for a bit and said in a low voice, "If Marshal sees the 9 sirs, please greet them on my behalf." He turned and hollered, "Janissaries stay. The rest of you depart immediately." Taizheng had been standing on Tianxian Cliff. This was the 9 Supremes Memorial Hall built by the Empire of Yutong. The sculptures of the 9 masked men stood on the stage in a carefree and natural manner, their gazes filled with disdain, as if they were still laughing at the world. Taizheng waited for a full 3 days. There was no news at all. "Marshal, this," a janissary said carefully. "The statues of Lord Supreme Wind and Lord Supreme Flame seem to be stained, and there's a smell of fire. Is it really these 2 lords who have manifested themselves, and not?" Taizheng looked disappointed. Indeed, compared to the other 7 Supremes, the sculptures of Supreme Wind and Lord Flame seemed to have gone out before. Even Taizheng was a little doubtful. Could it be that Supreme Wind and Lord Flame had manifested themselves? Were they not dead? When the 9 Supremes went to war, all 9 of them had always gone out together. There had never been a time when only 2 of them participated in the war. 9 Supremes Lords. Taizheng knelt on both knees. "Thank you for saving me. The heroic spirits are not far away. Accept my bow." Taizheng heaved a long sigh and descended Tianxian Cliff after he was done bowing. "Since the 9 Supremes are unwilling to meet me, I shall feign ignorance as well. Pass down the order, just say that." Taizheng's expression was solemn as he said softly, "The army has been defeated. In the face of danger, the 9 Supremes Lords Wind and Lord Flame have manifested themselves in midair and defeated the enemy. The border has been saved." Yes. After the war, the gale had changed its direction, turning into a strong east wind. Yin Yang was squeezing out the last of his strength. The sky was moaning as the clouds filled the sky like a mighty army, advancing towards Yutong at lightning speed. It was as if countless heroic spirits were marching in the direction of their hometown in a neat formation. The battlefield has been through 100 battles. A general can't avoid death on the battlefield. A man should have no regrets in life. What harm is there in dying for the country and the people? The loyal heart shines like the sun and moon. The iron bones forge the border. The 10,000 miles of wind blows, sending the loyal souls back to Yutong. There's no end to the chapter. Let's finish writing 4,600 words. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.